We do have quorum, clerk, so going to call the meeting to order and advise those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode, and that all devices are muted, and that it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Clerk, are you aware of any apologies? No, at this stage, okay, and we would potentially have a member joining us via Zoom. We'll liaise with that. Okay, declarations of interest. Members, I would remind you of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Do any members have any interest to declare in relation to any of today's agenda items?
I declare an independent partner in the farm business.
Thank you, William. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, members. Two items that I'd like to refer you to just as a open chairperson's business. You will have received a copy via email from the clerk just now about an open letter which has been written by the Northern Ireland Agri-Food sector. It's an open letter to Minister Muir in regards to their call for a suspension of the current consultation process on NAP. So you have that in your papers. The reason I'm putting it in now in terms of this business is that it is now in the public domain. It has now been published in some of the farming and agriculture material. And then just to make you aware that yesterday there was an online consultation that the department were doing on the NAP consultation proposals. There was some sort of systems failure for around 10 minutes with regard to the link, but they did restore a live link. So I think it was down for about 9 minutes between 10 to 2 and 13:59. A new link was issued, and there was around 180 people successfully able to join that consultation meeting. There's one tonight, I think, online, and there's one this afternoon in Greenmount. The online one tonight, I think, is around 200 links sent for that, so it's definitely piqued the interest. Agenda item 3 is chairperson's business. Item number 1, refer you to pages 6 to 8 of your pack for the written ministerial statement dated the 23rd of May regarding rural needs monitoring report, 1st of April 2023 to 31st of March 2024. Members, the Minister states that the 7th Rural Needs Annual Monitoring has been published on the Department's website and details of a number of policies with a positive impact that will help improve the lives of those who live and work in rural areas. Have you any comments? Are you content to note, members? Thank you. Item number 2, refer you to page 9 to 13 of the pack to the oral ministerial statement on the 27th of May regarding the British Irish Council Environmental Work Sector meeting that was held in Kew Gardens, London on Thursday the 8th of May. As you will be aware, the Minister made the oral statement to the Assembly on Tuesday outlining the topics of that which were discussed at the meeting. Have you any comments to make? Are you content to note? Content to note? Item number 3, I refer you to page 14 of the pack, the correspondence from the Department dated the 23rd of May with an update on the Fair Dealing Obligations Pig Regulations 2025. As you will recall, we received a written briefing on the 27th of March on the Fair Dealing Obligation Pig Regulations and noted that the purpose of the regulations is to improve fairness in the UK pig sector and introduce mandatory written contracts between first purchasers and pig sellers for all pigs sold in the UK unless a seller opts out of having a written contract. The regulations also made an amendment to the previous Fair Dealing Obligations Milk Regulation 2024 in relation to tiered pricing in exclusive milk contracts. Members of the Department advised that the regulations were made on the 21st of May and will begin to come into operation from August to apply to all new contracts and existing contracts from summer 2026. Any comments, or are you content to note? Okay, thank you, members. Item number 4, the Infrastructure Committee members have accepted our invitation to attend the follow-up concurrent meeting at 9:30 next Tuesday, which is the 3rd of June in the Senate Chamber. This is regarding the ongoing issues for landowners and farmers in connection with the A5 Western Transport Corridor. At that meeting, we will be briefed by DAERA officials from the Natural Environment Division and the UFU. It had been suggested last week that a farmer might come to the meeting who had been affected. However, the UFU did not feel it was appropriate for them to ask such a person to represent the issues. The clerk has requested that the UFU briefing paper contain case studies if it were possible. Members, if you wish to hear from some individual farmers once we have had the concurrent meeting next week, this may be better arranged as an informal session. Members,
can I ask if some of those papers will be available before the meeting?
Yeah, we've asked for
them to be provided.
We've asked them to be provided by Friday so we can get the pack out.
Should be out in advance.
Yeah.
Okay. Content, members, thank you. Item number 5, I refer you to pages 3 to 5 of the table papers to an invitation from the RSPB to an event entitled Embedding Nature's Recovery and Offshore Development on the 9th of June from the 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. And this is going to be at Parliament Buildings. The event will discuss the steps needed to achieve nature-positive developments at sea. Are members any comments? Are you content to note? That's it. Agenda item 4 are the minutes of the 22nd of May 2025. Refer to pages 16 to 31 of the pack for the draft minutes dated 22nd of May. If you have any comments, please make them, or are you content with the minutes as drafted? And if you are, I will then sign these, and these will be published on the website. Content? Thank you, members. Yep. Okay. Agenda item 5 is matters arising. Okay, item number 1, referred to page 33 of the pack, the response dated 22nd of May from the Department regarding the DAERA final budget 25-26. As you will recall, we considered this matter at our meeting on the 15th of May and sought further clarity on the 0.7 million expenditure plan for future rural policy 25-26. The response states that interim proposals are being developed to address potential gaps as DAERA's transition to a future rural policy. The 0.7 million set aside is to provide funding certainty in 25-26 while the proposals are being finalised and will be kept under review at each monitoring round. Any comments to make, members? Are you content to note? Okay, thank you, members. On budget matters, I was speaking on behalf of the committee on Tuesday regarding supply resolution for the Northern Ireland main estimates 25-26. Okay, members, we're now going to move to agenda item 6, which is a briefing from the Office of Environmental Protection. Members, we were last briefed by the OEP in March 2024, and since then they have conducted a wide programme of work, including a range of enforcement actions and publishing 4 major reports for Northern Ireland, which we have seen in our packs when they were each published. Today we are holding a substantial evidence session with them, and we will conduct this in 2 parts. Members, firstly I refer you to the briefing paper from the OEP starting at page 38 to 43 of the pack. I'm going to also refer you to the following papers in your pack, and if you need these highlighted, just indicate to me or the clerk if it's okay. So the witness bios are at page 36 to 37. The following 4 OEP reports: a review of the implementation of the Water Framework Directive regulations and River Basin Management Planning in Northern Ireland, or for short, the Water Quality Report published in September 2024. That starts at page 44, members. Then we have the Drivers and Pressures on Nature report published in October 2024, starting at page 218. We have the Bathing Waters report published in November 2024, starting at page 346, and the Protected Sites report published in April 2025, which starts at page 425. The OEP Strategy and Enforcement Policy starts at page 592, and the OEP Advice to DAERA on the Environmental Improvement Plan starts at page 665. So members, we will start today's session with a short introductory briefing from the OEP, and then move on to taking a briefing on the Water Quality Report and the Bathing Waters Report, if that's okay. We will then have a Q&A session with the OEP on those 2 reports before moving on to taking a briefing on the Drivers and Pressures on Nature's report and the Protected Sites report, followed by a Q&A session on those reports. So I'm now going to welcome the following OEP representatives to the meeting: Dame Glenys Stacey, Chair; Natalie Proser, Chief Executive Officer; Professor Robbie McDonald, Chief Insights Officer; Dr. Donnacha Doody, Head of Analysis for Northern Ireland; and John McCartney, Principal Monitoring Environmental Law Officer. I'm now going to invite you to give the introductory briefings, and then followed by a briefing on the Water Quality and Bathing Waters Report. Thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us here today, and also for providing your members with such a full pack. That's really helpful start for us. Thank you. You're right. There are a number of us here today. Natalie and I aren't on our own. And I should say, as well as those you've mentioned, our Chief of Staff, Richard Greenhouse, is here. He carries a special responsibility for Northern Ireland. Malcolm Beattie, who is our Commission member for Northern Ireland, you'll be familiar with Malcolm, I'm sure. And also we have Craig here, who is the strategic lead for Northern Ireland and all things Northern Ireland, in fact. So you have us en masse today. But thank you very much for the invitation. We welcome it. And I know there's much ground that you want to cover, so I'll just keep this opening address short. You all know that our role here and in England is to hold government to account for its environmental commitments and obligations. And just to confirm that although we have Northern Ireland and England to cover, we operate in effect as one organisation. So we do have some staff based here, 16 people, out of our total head count of around 80. So, and we have a Northern Ireland board member, as I've said, Malcolm, and our board often comes to Northern Ireland to meet and undertake their regular site visits. Both our board and our staff have a good record of that. Now, we found that in going about our work here, there's been a good level of interest, actually, and a lot of cooperation from those we're working alongside, and dedication as well. And I should give DAERA a mention here, as we have experienced good, in fact, high levels of cooperation from DAERA, which is welcome. We also can see that actually since we started, in fact, there's a growing expectation amongst stakeholders and the public that action will be taken to protect and improve the environment. I think you'll agree that interest is is growing. I think the issues seen at Loch Ness here have really brought the wider environmental issues and challenges into sharp focus for you and for many others. And we know there's much to be done to protect the environment here for the future and for this generation now, so that we can make sure that nature can thrive as it must really to support a healthy economy and society. And we would argue that Loch Ness is a big red flag, an indicator of what can and indeed will happen elsewhere if things don't materially change. So there are these challenges, but there are also opportunities. Now, we are fully committed at the OEP to play our full part here as in England. And as you've mentioned, we've undertaken a number of investigations, so happy to talk about those, but won't go through them now. And then we have published these 4 reports, which again you've named and put in your pack. 3 of them are statutory reports, but the first one was our first step, if you like, to fully appreciate the drivers and pressures here, and that's in fact the name of that report, Drivers and Pressures Affecting Biodiversity. So we've got this suite of, if you like, a mothership report laying out the ground, and then 3 statutory reports that follow. We can look at these reports in a bit more detail in the time we've got and with the people we've got, but I don't want to preempt those discussions, but just to summarise, if you like, the common threads from those reports. There are unsustainable pressures on the environment, ineffective implementation of environmental laws we find commonly. Actually, it's not just a problem of yours, we find it in England as well. Governance really that is weak and has failed actually to address the substantive issues here. And then delays in putting in place vital plans to thrive. So we're a small organisation. We try and focus our efforts on the key issues rather than anything else, the significant issues. And there is one specific environmental issue that comes up time and again here, and that is nutrients. Nutrients is and that has become quite a big area of attention for us, understandably. So our report on drivers and pressures really identified what is affecting nature here in Northern Ireland. 2 principal pressures causing diversity loss, land use change and pollution. The 2 things to keep in mind. And excess nutrients from farming and from sewage are the main forms of pollution having an impact here. So we are focusing much of our attention now, understandably, on nutrient pollution. So, for example, we've commissioned an evaluation of the wastewater system and its impact on protected sites, which I think will be due sooner rather than later. And we're also looking closely at the Nutrient Action Programme. It could potentially be so significant here, but we want to be sure that it goes far enough to address the challenges of water quality that we face at Loch Ness and indeed elsewhere. So to sum up then, nutrient pollution must be addressed if nature's to thrive here. It's not a maybe, it must be addressed, and it won't be easy, and it will need cross-government effort and leadership. We understand that, and buy-in from many in the community as well. But if it isn't done, then the types of issues that we're seeing now, so sadly at Loch Ness, will become common experiences across many more sites. I look forward to having a chance with colleagues here to talk about our 4 reports, but that's what I have to say for the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. Thank you. Is someone going to perhaps lead on a briefing, particularly in regard to then with the water quality report and the bathing waters report?
Yes, those are our first 2, and it's John who's going to lead us on that. John, if you don't mind.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and present a short summary of a very long and very complex and detailed report. I'll start off with the Water Framework Directive Regulations report based on the Northern Ireland regulations. This was a report we produced under the OEP's functions of monitoring environmental law on the implementation of environmental law. It's important to note the Water Framework Directive regulations are a central piece of law concerned with protecting and improving the water environment. The regulations reflect an outcome-based approach to environmental law and specify processes to achieve those outcomes. They aim to return water bodies to a condition that is at or close to their natural state. They involve monitoring the condition of water bodies, assessing pressures on them, setting binding objectives, and applying measures to achieve them. The objectives and measures should be set out in river basin management plans, which should then cascade through to decision-making and physical action to realise the intended outcomes. Here in Northern Ireland, we have 3 river basin districts under the regulations, 2 of which span north-south areas. For these river basin districts, DAERA, as the executive agency, and the Northern Ireland Environment Agency produce river basin management plans. The plans should include environmental objectives that have been set and summarise the programmes of measures to meet them. Our report looked at the effectiveness of the regulations and their implementation. This was based not only on our own assessment, but information gathered from DAERA, NIEA, from Department for Infrastructure, and substantive engagement with various stakeholders, including industry, agriculture, and non-governmental organisations. The report was published and laid before the Northern Ireland Assembly on the 3rd of September 2024. The key messages in our report, I'll try and summarise here. Our report found that although the regulations are broadly sound, they are not being implemented and delivering as they should. Most of Northern Ireland's water bodies are in an unsatisfactory state, with levels of some individual pollutants have been reduced over the years, pollution and other pressures are still problematic. The pace of change has stalled, with the last statistical report showing only 29% of rivers and other surface water bodies currently meeting the regulations' objectives of good ecological status or good ecological potential. That 29% is actually a drop from the previous year's 31%. This has been a long-standing challenge, despite the efforts of public authorities and others over many decades to bring about improvements through legislation, policy and practical means. DAERA and others will therefore need to do more if a healthy water environment is to be achieved. The regulations require that DAERA develop and implement river basin management plans on a 6-year cycle. These plans are critical as they set out the objectives and measures needed to protect and improve the water environment. Critically, and of substantial concern, the latest river basin management plan, the third in the cycle of implementation of the regulations to date, has not been finalised and rolled out as required by the regulations. The river basin management plan is important because it sets out how waters will be protected and improved and the objectives that it should achieve. It should therefore drive implementation of water quality by laying objectives and specifying what action needs to be taken by whom and when for those objectives to be achieved. The last plan was due in December 2021. While DAERA consulted on the draft in April 2021, it has not been published at the time, was not published at the time of the report, and in fact remains unpublished today. Under the river basin management plans, under the regulations, river basin management plans should contain a full set of water body level environmental objectives, including any associated exemptions and a summary of programmes and measures to achieve those objectives. However, we found that the draft plan that DAERA consulted on did not contain much of this information. In particular, it was missing specific objectives for individual water bodies, and its information on measures to achieve intended outcomes was very general. Our report therefore called for the draft river basin management plan to be strengthened in a number of key areas, and for the final plan to be approved and implemented without further delay to help drive improvement in Northern Ireland's waters. Having looked at the draft plans and previous plans, our assessment is that Northern Ireland is not on track to meet environmental objectives in the regulations or the targets DAERA has set. We are particularly concerned about the adequacy of measures to achieve the environmental objectives with a 2027 deadline. We highlight a need to act with pace, urgency and clarity in relation to these outcomes and others that depend upon them. It is also notable and important that the presence of certain ubiquitous, persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals is causing all surface water bodies to fail their good chemical status objective. This is largely as a legacy of the past use of these substances, and appears likely to continue for many years. However, in common with other UK jurisdictions, Northern Ireland has not yet put in place systems under the Water Framework regulations to replace former EU mechanisms to monitor and act upon new and emerging chemical risks. This remains a gap. We made 16 recommendations in our report to the Northern Ireland Assembly. The Northern Ireland Executive for DAERA and these regulations to be implemented more effectively and ultimately to help protect and improve the quality of Northern Ireland's groundwater, lakes, rivers and coastal waters. We also identified 8 implementation issues involving DAERA where we concluded that, based on the information we had assessed, the Department may not have complied with the requirements of the regulations. DAERA officially responded to our report on the 2nd of December 2024. DAERA's response welcomed the OEP's review. It acknowledged our key findings that progress is needed to enhance Northern Ireland's water environment. It also committed to working closely with the OEP and all stakeholders to improve the quality of Northern Ireland's rivers, lakes, transitional coastal waters and groundwaters. DAERA's response appears to have accepted all of our recommendations, which we welcome. In some instances, we understand the Department has accepted the recommendations in full as something they will do in practice the way we suggested. In a few instances, for example, in relation to the level of detail in which the programme of measures will be specified, DAERA's response to accept our recommendations in principle as being what they should do and will seek to do as far as practical in the third cycle plan, while noting the resource constraints and committing to do more in the fourth cycle and subsequent plans. There's only one recommendation which DAERA has not accepted in the normal sense of the word. This is not because they disagree with it, but rather because it is no longer relevant. This concerns our recommendation that DAERA clarify the relationship between the previous general working targets, which were in the draft plan as a general statement of ambition, and the actual binding environmental objectives for which water bodies be set under the regulations. We found this interaction unclear. DAERA's response indicates they have now decided not to continue with the working targets, so the recommendation is no longer applicable. The current position, we now await the overdue River Basin Management Plan to see how far it incorporates our recommendations and addresses potential non-compliance issues that we have highlighted. We have been told by DAERA at the start of May that Minister Moore has approved the River Basin Management Plan and tabled it for consideration by the Executive to be published as soon as the Executive has given approval. DAERA officials have also confirmed that they understand the urgency of publishing the plan and are working diligently to finalise this without further delay. We do not know the specific cause of the delay, but note our report has called for significant improvements in the draft plan, and that DAERA also needs to consider the implications of a significant legal judgment concerning the equivalent legislation in England, as well as seeking agreement obviously across the Executive. The Department for Infrastructure, for example, will have specific interest in the plan in view of the implications for wastewater and transport sectors in particular. Based on the information available, we identified in our report several key areas where we can currently consider that the approach to implementation may not comply with the requirements of the regulations. These relate to the delay in finalising the overdue River Basin Management Plan, the lack of water body level environmental objectives in the draft River Basin Management Plans, the use of the working target as previously discussed, how objectives will be achieved through the largely generic programme of measures in the draft plan, timeframes to make measures operational, the approach to the justification of exemptions in the previous River Basin Management Plans, and public participation and consultation on certain aspects of this plan and the previous one. The condition of some water bodies has also declined, which is apparently a contravention of the regulations. We will revisit these compliance issues once we have seen the final third cycle River Basin Management Plan. We have the option of existing our enforcement powers should we judge it appropriate to do so. As a point of comparison, it is worth noting that we have identified some similar issues in our report on the implementation of the equivalent regulations in England. We have now commenced a formal enforcement investigation into compliance with these regulations by DAERA and the Environment Agency. In conclusion, we found that the Water Framework Directive regulations to be broadly sound as a legal instrument, but they are not being implemented or delivering as they should for Northern Ireland's waters. The upcoming and overdue River Basin Management Plan is critically important because it sets objectives and a detailed roadmap of how these objectives on how to protect and improve water quality here will be achieved. Most of the issues we identify could be addressed within the existing regime. If applied effectively, we consider the Water Framework Directive regulations provide a broadly sound basis to manage and monitor the water environment. We have therefore advocated retention of their fundamental underlying structure and approach, while highlighting some key opportunities to improve the regime without lowering current levels of protection or lessening ambition. We have also made recommendations to strengthen the wider legal, governance and policy landscape to better protect and enhance the water environment. The main thing that is required now is the adoption of an effective final third cycle River Basin Management Plan containing specific objectives and measures for their achievement, followed by substantive implementation of that plan in pace. And that's my summary of the report. Apologies, it took a little longer than it should have.
Not a problem. And could we also take the report on the bathing waters?
Yes.
And could I just ask, because if you could take it, most of it will be taken as read, but if you can come to,
Happy to do so.
Thank you, because I know members have a good indication of some questions off the back of both reports. Thank you, John.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity again. The summary of the bathing waters report hopefully shouldn't take as long. The bathing waters report was another report that we probably produced under our functions of monitoring and reporting on the implementation of environmental law. It looked at the quality of bathing water regulations 2008 and their implementation. The primary purpose of these regulations is the protection of human health. They involve the identification of specific areas of bathing waters and the management and monitoring of water quality on those sites. Our report considered the effectiveness as a legal instrument, their application in practice, and their coherence with wider law and policy. As with our assessment of the Water Framework Directive regulations, we looked at the bathing water regulations through assessing publicly available information obtained from DAERA, NIEA, and again, substantive engagement with stakeholders. The report was laid before the Northern Ireland Assembly on the 19th of November 2024. The key messages of the report: first of all, we determined that the requirement of the regulations are being implemented broadly effectively, though with room to further improve water quality. Our main conclusion is the regulations need to be updated to reflect changes to recreational use of water since they were introduced in order to protect the public. This is because the current regulations focus narrowly around the specific recreational activity of bathing, which in practice means swimming, and around a fixed bathing season that runs from June to September. There is now a much greater variety of water uses than when the current legislation was first developed, and a whole variety of activities which result in people being exposed to risk from exposure to polluted water. This raises important questions about the ways in which the existing regulations are working. We have suggested, for example, that the regulations should be updated so they include surfers, paddleboarders, windsurfers, and other water users, and the year-round nature of those activities. In terms of water quality, we found Northern Ireland's results have got significantly better since the regime was introduced. And while still having room for further improvement, the number of areas identified is quite small and needs to be treated with some caution. Of the officially identified bathing waters, 18 out of the 26, or 69%, achieved excellent status in 2023. While this may sound reasonable, in fact it placed Northern Ireland as one of the lower performers in Europe in realising excellent bathing water quality. In contrast, more than 85% of EU bathing waters were excellent in 2023. Also in 2023, 6 official sites in Northern Ireland were good, 1 was sufficient and 1 was poor. At the time of the report, in addition to those 26 official bathing waters, DAERA had also identified 7 so-called candidate sites. These were areas which met the criteria for bathing waters but had not yet been added to the official list. In the first year of results from the 7 candidate sites in the first year where the 7 results were included alongside the official bathing waters resorts, the picture changed considerably. Across a set of 33 bathing waters, 19 were excellent in 2023, 8 were good, 1 was sufficient and 5 were poor. This meant, for example, that the inclusion of the candidate sites, the percentage rate as excellent in 2023 fell from 69% to 58%, while those rated as poor increased from 4 to 15%. This shows the sensitivity of the regime to the addition of new sites that may bring new challenges as well as the scope for further improvements in bathing water quality. It is noted that the results published by DAERA for 2024, which were completed after we published our report, were better. For example, the 2024 results show 22 of the 26 sites rated as excellent, which is 84%, with none rated poor. This takes Northern Ireland closer to the European average, although the candidate sites are included in the figure falls back to 70%, which is again amongst the lower band in Europe. Monitoring and reporting, we also concluded in our report that requirements for sampling water quality on the regulation should be reviewed. This should ensure that the locations and number of sampling points provides representative assessment of the water quality and health risks, especially across the larger sites. Additionally, we suggest that more can be done to effectively communicate the health risks at specific sites at times to the public. This should include the potential to undertake more real-time monitoring or forecasting of water quality. Such information could then be provided to the public that is more relevant to their immediate or imminent recreational use rather than providing a view of water quality in the past. Referring back to our work on the Water Framework regulations, we highlighted opportunities to strengthen how bathing waters are set and achieved, and for increased coherence between bathing water regulations and other policies and laws. In particular, the final third cycle river basin management plan under the Water Framework Directive regulations should set specific objectives for each bathing water and a programme of measures to achieve those. DAERA officially responded to our report on the 18th of February 2025. In its response, DAERA agreed it's timely to consider the issues in our report, has committed to reviewing the current regime, as well as having acted on a number of points, including identifying 7 new bathing waters. We made 11 recommendations in our report to DAERA. In overall terms, DAERA introduced its response by saying the recommendations are far-reaching and, if fully implemented, represent a change in policy in the management of bathing waters and the wider water environment. However, the Department agrees broadly that it's timely to consider these issues. In particular, DAERA recognised the wider categories of water users now in play, along with the expansion of open water swimming in recent years, and its definitions of bathers and beach users, which will be considered in a future review by the end of 2026, as set out in the Northern Ireland EIP. The response also broadly agreed to our recommendation on the extension of the bathing season, which DAERA has said was already under active consideration. DAERA acknowledged the need to aim for good or excellent status of bathing waters and said the Department is committed to ensuring that the linkages between river basin management planning process and managing the pressures in all waters, including bathing waters, is fully understood. However, as already noted, DAERA has not yet published the final third cycle river basin management plan, so we cannot assess any further to the extent to which the intention has been reflected in practice. In our report, we highlighted that relatively small numbers of bathing water sites in Northern Ireland compared to most other European countries, particularly at inland locations. We also noted that has been several years since new areas have been formally identified under legislation, with several proposed areas having been identified as suitable but not added to the official list. We are pleased to see this is now being corrected. On Tuesday, the 6th of May, Minister Moore announced that 7 new bathing water sites would be formally identified for Northern Ireland. This includes Northern Ireland's first inland bathing site at Racewood on the shores of Lough Neagh. The legislation to officially turn the former candidate sites into official bathing waters is completed and will enter into force on the 31st of May. This is in time for the new bathing water season on the 1st of June. We welcome DAERA's identification of these 7 new bathing water sites. It will mean that additional steps will need to be taken to ensure the necessary quality standards are met. This may be a challenge, particularly at the new inland bathing site at Racewood on the shores of Lough Neagh, but we do believe this is the right thing to do. Overall, in conclusion, we see a regime that is being implemented effectively in terms of compliance with monitoring, classification and reporting of obligations in the bathing water regulations. Application of the regulations has also seen significant improvements in bathing water quality since the regime was introduced in the 1990s. At the same time, we see room for improvement in how the current regulations are applied, including how bathers are identified and in a number of such areas, particularly identification of a number of areas, particularly at inland sites. There is also scope to achieve better outcomes, with Northern Ireland currently being among the lower performers in Europe, realising excellent bathing water sites. We think there needs to be a clearer, more ambitious and purposeful approach to setting and pursuing objectives for bathing water under the Water Framework regulations. It also needs a greater degree of coherence between the bathing water regulations and other laws and policies to address all relevant sources of pollution. More fundamentally, we consider that the design of the regulations is not comprehensive when assessed against current societal trends. In particular, their focus on bathing and fixed bathing season limits, the ability of the regime to protect people's health when they use these water for other recreational purposes or at other times. Public exploitation and uses of water for leisure purposes have moved on significantly since the regulations were developed, and the regulations have not kept up with that societal change. That's a
Thank you
very
very
brief
much.
summary.
I'm going to change your second name to McGlone because we have a member here when he tells me he's going to make something brief, he doesn't actually do it. John, thank you so much for that, for the briefing and for the papers that you've already shared with us. So thank you so much for that. I noticed in your report that it states that this has been an area of work that, despite the efforts of public authorities and others over many decades to bring about the improvements through legislative policy and practical means, that progress has been slow. And I make no apologies for asking this because it's something that we need to address in Northern Ireland. In this last 25 years, we've had 5 instances where we haven't had any legislation possible. So whilst we can all point our fingers in many directions, I think I'm just wondering, has there been an assessment made at any stage in regards to the impact of us having no government here for 11 years out of the last 25, and what impact that might have had on the speed of response and our ability actually to engage with stakeholders and to move things on as they should be?
So I'll start, but we haven't done an assessment of that. Others might have done. 11 years out of 25 leaves 14 years out of 25 where action could happen. And of course we know that in all that time officials have been in post and have made every effort to get things ready for decision making when it comes. So I'm sure there will have been an impact, but there are still 14 years where progress could have been made. So just to say, for example, on the River Basin Management Plan, the third iteration, we know the draft is there. We hope it's better than it was when we first saw it. We know it's now sitting, waiting for the executive to consider it. What we don't understand, Chair, is why that would take a length of time, or even why it hasn't already been considered. These things are obscure to us. Do others have anything to add?
I know it's a slightly difficult question to answer because it's a kind of political connotations, but the political connotations have real life consequences as far as I'm concerned.
They do.
There's been a change in tone from, I've noticed in this last 2 weeks, from the Minister for DAERA in regard to cross-departmental working. Last year he'd indicated to the Minister for Infrastructure that he wanted to work with the Minister for Infrastructure collaboratively to tackle the pollutant by any water, but the Minister's now taken a different approach to the current Minister for Infrastructure and has said about a much more robust attitude to holding feet to fire. Do you see any evidence of either an improvement or a deterioration in cross-executive work to tackle the issue of water quality?
In the last 2 weeks?
In this, well, we've been back 2 years even, so there was a promise made last year to work collegiately, but now it seems to have changed. Has there been evidence of a more collegiate response?
Donnacha, do you know?
Perhaps to say that we are pleased to see initiatives that indicate cross-party, cross-departmental working. Major issues such as nutrients, which are balanced between wastewater, septic tanks, agriculture, etc., can't be tackled in isolation. Unfortunately, and maybe I'm speaking slightly out of turn here, but please correct me if I feel I'm wrong, environmental damage, once it occurs, takes a long time to recover. For example, we look at Loch Ness, we look at some issues in and around other waterways. There are no quick overnight fixes. Once you've reached that point of saturation, once you've reached that point of damage, even when we have new plans, new initiatives published cross-departmentally, the implementation, the effective and speedy implementation of those plans is the only way to move forward. And unfortunately, we don't get an instant result. Once the environment is damaged, it takes time to recover.
Yes, in terms of Loch Ness, for instance, now there's a bit of a change in the wording where they talk about it. It has been decades in this repair. It's going to take decades to repair, but that's still going to necessitate proper collaboration across the executive.
It is, and just to answer your former question more directly, there may well be greater collaboration, but it's not visible to us. We don't see it. We're not looking for it. We're looking for the solutions, but we're not evaluating the level of political collaboration, but we can't point to evidence of it. No.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I've got one further question on the water quality and then one on bathing waters before I move to other members, if that's okay. In regard to the river basin management plan, I think it's a 6-year planning cycle. Do you have any insight as to why the latest plan is taking so long to be published? And forgive me if I missed that in your briefing, John, but do you...
I think that very, very simply, Mr. Chairman, the answer is that we have pushed and pushed. The Minister has said it's been sent to the Executive. DAERA officials, who I've been working with quite a lot, have also diligently pushed this. Nobody can answer me as to why it hasn't moved from the Executive.
And Chair, there are a couple of things we're aware of. So, for example, we took a view about the first draft of it. We thought it didn't actually do the business. And, of course, we've since made specific recommendations. We would hope that perhaps one of the reasons is that our recommendations are being properly considered. But there's also been some changes in the legislative, or not legislative, but legal position in England because of a recent judgment, Pickering, which is known colloquially as, and that does need to be considered here as well. So there are a couple of things there that may give pause for thought in a positive way that may result in a more comprehensive, more effective river basin management plan, but we're not told that that's the reason for the delay. It's just a hope that it is. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And just one on the Bathing Waters report, if that's okay. And it is, I suppose, it starts off on a positive note. You've already stated that you feel that the current regime is being implemented effectively in terms of compliance and monitoring, classification, reporting on the current obligations in the bathing water regulations. But a review of these regulations, many would contend, needs to broaden the scope of water activities. I think you've hinted at that, John, because it's not just seasonal anymore.
Yeah.
Cold water dippers are happening in all of our rivers and around our waterways. We've also been contacted this week by the Clean Water Sports Alliance in Northern Ireland, who've said that there needs to be a broadening of that scope. Is that something that you would agree with? And
Very
if you
much
do,
so, yeah.
could you even outline what that might look like?
So I think we've made specific recommendations already in our bathing water report in relation to the bathing season. You know, it's no longer a seasonal affair. As you say, cold water dippers, they're at it all year round. We've also looked again at the extent, you know, people are using more stretches of open water more often, so we need to actually recognise that and have more sites, particularly inland sites, recognised here. And then lastly, the regulations rather anachronistically refer to bathing, whereas we know that waters are used for a number of other leisure reasons, and it would make sense to recognise that. And that's quite important in terms of the measurement of use, for example. You know, so there's a few ways in which they could be rightly more expansive to suit the modern day. Yeah.
I'll just make one final comment, and this is just something that I've spoken about a number of times. I see the need to address this quite specifically, probably on a public health longitudinal study, because I've got many friends who are dipping in water and it's definitely untested. And I think that whilst it's okay at the moment, the repercussions of that long term could be.
And it's
something
also,
we need
it's
more
not
awareness
just
around.
what you can see or what we're currently measuring.
Yes.
You know, you need a bit of foresight here, if I may say so, to make sure those waters are safe now and in the future. But for them to be safe now, you need to look at what we're not measuring.
And there are opportunities for pollution risk forecasting models. Some of those are being piloted, I've seen in England. They're imperfect, but there's an opportunity to use artificial intelligence to give better and more granular information to water users. I'm a cold water swimmer myself. I always declare a particular interest, and that would be really valuable information for water users to have if that kind of technology could be deployed, particularly at key bathing sites.
And real-time information is so relevant. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for that, and thank you for your indulgence there. Declan.
Thank you very much for your report. In your report, you noted that in May 2023, you launched an investigation into advice by DAERA on the ammonia emissions, and this was closed when DAERA said they would no longer use the operation protocol. Now, we have a very unusual situation here now where farmers, as a consequence of that, can no longer replace buildings like with like, or worse than that, they can't replace old buildings with buildings that are more environmentally friendly and have less ammonia emissions. How is that beneficial to the environment?
Thank you. And of course, there was a bit of to and froing over a number of months in relation to the protocol here, but let me ask Natalie to give you a bit more detail. Thank you.
I think it's important to reflect where we come from on this from the Office of Environmental Protection, and that's that the existing, at that time, operational protocol didn't comply with the law. Now it's not for us to tell departments how they should comply with the law, but it is for us to say when they are not. Now, I think we can all recognise that having to withdraw a protocol because of its unlawfulness and leaving that gap for those wanting to build, making sure they've got good guidance in place so that they're making decisions in compliance with the law is not ideal. But really that is one for DAERA to work in relation to making sure they have got a lawful protocol. Now, we now believe that they do have a lawful protocol, and that is in large part where our interest at the OEP concludes.
Sorry. Okay. Well, I suppose the situation I have now, where virtually there's almost an embargo on development on farms, and that's the situation it is now. It's virtually impossible. Seeing making your decisions, because the decisions of the OEP be based purely on environmental, or do you look at the economic and social impacts? Because in a lot of rural communities where we're from, the backbone of the economies are farm businesses and agri-food operations. So do you just focus purely on the environmental impact, or do you consider the wider social and economic impact of decisions?
The way that we make decisions on investigations and use of our legal powers is set out in our legislation. Essentially, we firstly apply a seriousness test. So we look at whether the environmental harm arising from the potential breach is serious. In this case, it was very serious because what it was resulting in was unsustainable ammonia pressures on already very vulnerable habitats. That has a very material effect, both in terms of biodiversity and habitat, but also has an impact on human health as well. So the seriousness test was surpassed in that case. What we then do is look at whether we can, through our intervention, resolve those issues. This is another case where our intervention could clearly resolve those issues. What we don't do in terms of assessing both environmental harm and the resolvability of that is factor in social and economic factors. That really wouldn't be for us to do. That's not in line with a essentially quasi-judicial approach to resolving unlawfulness. So we wouldn't, for example, not enforce an environmental law where the breach was causing active harm because of cost factors. That wouldn't be a factor necessarily taken by the court. It can, however, be a factor taken into account by policymakers when determining how best to comply with the law, and that is right and proper, that is for policymakers to make those decisions. In this case, there was a clear and unambiguous unlawful conduct going on, and it was incumbent upon us through our powers to resolve that, which we did.
Just finally, so see we have the Rural Needs Act here in the north of Ireland. So would your decisions and recommendations have to be in accordance with the Rural Needs Act, and have to be would there be rural needs impact assessment carried out on the decisions and recommendations you would be making to DAERA and other bodies on the Rural Needs Act here that we have in operation here?
I'm not familiar with that specific.
What might help is a couple of things. One is that, yes, our job is to make sure that the law relating to the environment is complied with. We're not completely unaware of the context in which we do that. And indeed, one of the questions that we do ask ourselves is, in any particular scenario, is the law an us? Because if it is, then we're, very much persuaded that it's not for us to, impose it. But where the law is appropriate and sensible, it is our job to make sure it's complied with. And as far as I'm aware, we're not under any other duty, as we consider that any other statutory duty. But of course, policymakers and politicians may well be. As Natalie has said, it is for politicians and policymakers to decide how and in which way they are going to comply with the law and to produce revised guidance, and that's what they've done.
And many laws provide that discretion for policymakers to weigh and balance such factors. Those aren't for us, though. That's not what we're set out to do, and I would suggest that it wouldn't be appropriate for us to step into the policy space in that way.
Thank you.
Just to finish off on Declan's point, because I think there's an interesting dynamic here that's possibly happened, and I haven't quantified it out, that there might, in that planning aspect, on the failure to, for instance, if an application is made through planning where it determines that it will make an improvement, so the measure will make an improvement, there seems to be a chill factor within the department still to not expedite plans.
Right.
That's what, and that's just an assessment. I just think there may be a chill factor. So
Yeah.
I've asked a question recently on an application that demonstrates an improvement now, and I think it's the application.
So-
There may be a chill factor, I think.
Yeah, may well be. So if you perhaps recollect, we didn't ask the department to simply stop dealing with applications or to withdraw the guide. So actually, as I said, there's been a bit of to and froing, hasn't there? There's been a reaction to our intervention which perhaps hadn't been anticipated. But if there is now a reluctance in the department, then if I were you, I'd be getting the department here rather than the OEP. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that, Declan. John, you're next.
Mia?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you all, first of all, for the presentation this morning, and also the reports in front of us today, and others that you've done. You referenced earlier that there were common threads here of unsustainable pressure on the environment. And I don't think I would disagree with that.
Thank you.
Can I ask, Dame Glenys, if I may, to you, you recently stated that the OEP priorities for Northern Ireland were nutrients.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we've got this far and avoided that subject in detail this morning. But can I ask you to expand exactly on what that means, or expand a little more even on what that means?
In terms of our priorities now.
Yeah,
for
of the
year-
priority of nutrients,
Okay,
to put
yes,
some
most
detail on that.
certainly. So I'll hand over to Natalie in a moment for the detail, but we have a number of priorities here. Nutrients is the big one. We're also quite interested in governance here as well, the governance of the environment, where you'll know there are some gaps and opportunities to improve. But Natalie, do you want to go through our priorities, please?
I am going to pass on to our Chief Scientist, because you do have our Senior Responsible Officer for the Nutrients Programme sitting right here, and so I'm going to ask him to answer that question because he's far better qualified than I am. Go on, Robbie.
Thanks, Natalie. So we're slightly preempting our account of our drivers and pressures report, but the principal rationale for doing that was to take an objective look at all of the factors that affect the natural environment in Northern Ireland, particularly affecting loss of biodiversity. So in making that systematic assessment, it was pretty clear, and I won't preempt Donnacha's summary of that work, but it was pretty clear that the major pressures currently impacting biodiversity were nutrient pollution stemming both from the agri-food industry and wastewater treatment, and both of those making very significant contributions, and that was an ongoing problem. So when we consider our priorities, and looking at our obligations to look after environmental quality and water quality, air quality, nature, biodiversity, and enjoyment of the environment, and so on, it was clear that that was the area that cut across all of those interests, and that was the right area for us to focus on. We're not unaware that that is a major challenge, and in our drivers and pressures report, we looked at some of those solutions were relatively simple but extremely costly. So we're looking there at improvements to the wastewater treatment system, but other solutions were both complex and costly, and that's about reducing nutrient flow into Northern Ireland and reducing the losses to the natural environment, both into soil and into fresh waters and then coastal waters. So it was that objective look that led us to prioritising nutrients, and why Dame Glenys describes it in that way. Those are our top three.
You may well want us to go to the drivers and pressures report, because that's where we're dealing with it. But
Yeah, I have it in the session too. I know we'd sort of straight into it with some of the questions, but because I was hoping to maybe get a bit of a briefing in the other two papers and keep it in that lane. So
That's
if
fine.
you feel genuinely, if you feel that you want to keep something until that phase, I'm more than happy to do that. I'd rather do that if that's possible, but
yes,
the
thank
question was
you.
fair.
That
Okay.
makes sense.
Thank you, members. If we can, guys, in terms of that, keep the questions at the minute into the reports that we've had the briefing on, which is the bathing waters and the water quality and the bathing waters, because we have got a hopefully a wee snapshot coming in of the drivers, pressures in nature, and protected sites report. Is that okay? John, have you any more questions?
Nutrients are mentioned in
No,
reports
I
in that
know,
context.
but
So
it's just a strand.
I hope you would agree, not out of context, that I should raise that subject. Just to tease out a bit more detail on that last question, on the OEP Horizon scanning document for complaints and investigations published, I think, last week. The Nutrient Action Programme and Northern Ireland Water compliance with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive are referenced. What is this likely to mean when attention is being paid to that, and can we from that expect formal investigations to commence?
I wonder whether it might be useful to turn to you, Donnacha, in terms of the work that we've actually got planned in relation to nutrients, because it does flow from that, doesn't it? Yeah.
So back about a year ago, or 9 months ago, we set up the nutrients programme in Northern Ireland for the OEP, and that has kind of been done in 2 phases, and we're kind of just coming to the end of phase 1 at the moment. And phase 1 dealt with a number of different issues. It dealt with looking at, we've already mentioned, the evaluation of the wastewater treatment system and its impact on protected sites. We were also very interested in how the habitat regulations assessments overlap with nutrients in Northern Ireland, and particular nutrients into water. We were also doing a bit of work in terms of regulatory divergence, and we particularly focused in on nutrients in that particular case. We also had done some work in relation to we're now starting to focus on the Nutrient Action Programme, but we're taking 2 approaches there. We will put a response in relation to the Nutrient Action Programme consultation, but we're also taking a longer term look at this. We're going to do an environmental law report looking at it in more detail and fundamental issues around it. So that phase 1 is now taking us on to identifying a number of key issues that we feel we need to take further and look at. Now, how we address those is still to be decided within the OEP. But I suppose on the website, John was just highlighting that those are issues that we are interested in looking at.
Okay. On the business, really, and in the area of the outworkings of current problems and those common threads that we talked about earlier, if I may move to Loch Ness more specifically, and that can be taken on the relation to bathing waters now with the raised wood addition to the bathing waters list. You will know that any minister trying to deliver on environmental objectives will need 2 things before anything. The first one is resources, and the other one is political will. I'm sure you're not unaware of the fact you'll go to many places and give environmental presentations and there won't be much opposition, but then votes in that assembly or parliament or wherever it may be might be very different. And we're operating, for your information, in the context where a minister trying to take action has been called an environmental extremist in the parliamentary chamber, and trying to take robust action around problems on Loch Ness and our other waters. Loch Ness is perhaps the biggest environmental crisis in the UK. What action will the OEP be considering if Northern Ireland falls short in terms of our legal objectives to improve water quality?
Very astute question. Thank you very much, and something we've considered. So, Natalie, would you answer?
I think what Donnacha said answers part of your question. What we're looking at through the lens of the nutrient programme, but also what we've learned in terms of our scrutiny in the water sector, is that these issues are complex and interconnected. There are a raft of legal duties engaged. We've talked about the Water Framework Directive regulations, and you can see our active interest in there. We've also got, as you've noted, attention under the Urban Wastewater Directive. You might be aware that we've undertaken a major investigation in England in relation to compliance with those requirements. That has been a very substantial piece of work that has taken a long time because it is extremely complex and also foundational to the entire system of regulation. So we've learned quite a lot about how these things connect. What we're doing in relation to these particular issues in these legal duties is that we are making sure we fully understand them and we are well advanced on that journey. And we may consider in relation to some of those legal duties that the appropriate thing to do is investigate them. Now, we will do that where we think an investigation and legal compliance approach is the most optimal route to sorting out the underlying problem. What we've learned is that it isn't always, particularly where issues interconnect, and you look at one isolated bit of legal duties in the absence of where they situate, and you might be trying to solve the wrong problem, and you might be trying to solve a problem in a way that's just going to take too long. But we are considering it, and we are considering Urban Wastewater Directive. We'll also be taking into account responsibilities over nutrients and habitats as they connect. And we haven't chosen yet what our approach will be, but they will be in play and they will be given active consideration. We will try and choose the best way forward to get the best outcome in the quickest possible time for the environment, because that's how we approach the work. But we'll be very transparent about it as we go, so there won't be any surprises.
Okay, finally, if I may, and Dame Glenys, I'm back to one of your quotes. I hope you don't mind. It's referenced in the report also, but I've previously written it down to make sure that I'm accurate. You've previously said, and I quote, the agri-industry in its current form is making unsustainable demands on the environment. Can you or the team expand a little bit more this morning on what is meant by that statement?
Well, I'll start, but others will no doubt come in with something better. But just, first of all, I think the word sustainable and the correlated word unsustainable, they're overused generally, but we do mean it in this case. We do mean it is unsustainable over time. So you cannot, in our view, sustain the quality of your land, the quality and health of a key asset if you carry on as you're carrying on at the moment. That's what we mean by unsustainable over time. Secondly, we do point to certain things that lead to that. One of the biggest is just the importation of significant amounts of fertiliser from abroad that in turn has a good amount, an excessive amount perhaps, of nutrients, nitrogen as well as phosphorus. Often the attention isn't given to nitrogen, but it needs to be. You're using that to such an extent and the net impact on your land as a result of that is unsustainable. That's what we mean by it, in effect. Donna, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so we were very careful how we defined that, because sustainability is an issue that means different things to different people. We were focusing in on environmental sustainability. We were not talking about farm scale sustainability, because many farmers are working very well and doing their best at farm scale. And those practices need to be scaled up. And we were specifically talking about the agri-food industry, and that covers fertiliser, feed and processors, as well as farmers, are unsustainable. We also were very conscious that we didn't want to be looking back at the pristine conditions. We're not looking for pristine conditions. The statement is made based on do no further damage. Is it doing any further damage at this moment in time? And when you look at the current statistics in Northern Ireland, the farmland bird index is going down. Nutrient surplus in nitrogen and phosphorus is unsustainable. The pesticide use is expanding. Methane is going up, and ammonia is going up. So when you look at those together, it's very difficult not to make the statement that in its current form the industry is unsustainable.
Okay. So very finally, Chair, the balanced outcome, you could argue, is mitigation, and pretty urgently in the interests of the environment more generally, but also biodiversity. Mitigation being the key word there. Is that a fair assumption?
Right. No, do.
I wasn't clear on the questions.
I was just going to say, it depends what you mean by mitigation, doesn't it? I mean, you need to redress the balance, don't you? And if I were a policymaker looking at that, I'd look at the things that are doing the most damage. And I've mentioned fertilisers. I'd certainly be looking at that. But it does raise some big and complex issues, I think, for not just government, but society as a whole here. It's a pretty significant issue, isn't it, to say, actually, you need to significantly reduce your impact on the land. And that does raise some very tricky issues, I appreciate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Aoife?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your report today. A quick question. So, considering your report highlights two of the North's main river basins, which border north and south, was the Republic of Ireland used as one of the comparable selected jurisdictions?
Yeah, thank you, John.
Happy to answer. Yeah, we did a comparative evaluation of many European countries, but the first one obviously was Ireland. We also looked in detail at the cross-border compliance and the cross-border working, particularly with the local authorities. I can't remember the acronym now. LORCRO, the Irish water quality units. We also looked at information from the Irish Environmental Protection Agency. We found that parts, particularly the cross-border areas, there was a very, very dynamic and very positive input. And given that, for example, Lough Foyle, Carlingford Lough are actually one bank on each in each jurisdiction, well, you couldn't look at water quality issues and look at the overall water quality without looking at the inputs from both. So in short, the answer, yes, we did use Ireland as a comparator, and we found them very cooperative and in places very positive.
I know that we made a relatively simple comparison, at least with the Republic of Ireland, on our bathing waters report as well.
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Patty?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I'm not going to risk drawing you into the politics of the Nutrient Action Programme because there's enough of that in the newspapers today. I know I've read the pre-brief. The industry is really up in arms about it, and the perception of the industry and farming community as to how that's been approached. Now, John did touch on a very important point, and that is resources.
Yes.
From my point of view, objectively, as I would see it anyway, policy formulator here too, not only do you need the stick, but you need the carrot.
Yeah.
So therefore, and that carrot, from my mind anyway, would take a number of levels or a number of approaches. One's education, incentivisation and support along the way for, in this instance, that we deal with a lot here, the farming community, but clearly there are others who need that as well. I think if you went around the room, everybody would agree in one way or another that nutrients is a problem. It's how you approach that.
Absolutely.
You've quite clearly listened carefully to yourself there, Natalie. You quite clearly said the policy formulation is for us, the collective Democrat, or ultimately the courts to decide that. But all I'm saying is, I take it you would agree with education, incentivisation and support. Those would be pretty much key planks of, if you want to achieve, it doesn't even matter, Nutrients Action Programme, if you want to achieve any objective, those would be principal planks of your approach to it.
So a few years ago I did a review for farming regulation for DAERA, not with my OEP hat on, I didn't have it at the time, but immediately beforehand. If you look to see my own personal view, I'm very clear, that if you want to make a material difference, you need to specify the issue sufficiently well, really understand it, look at it any which way, and then use the appropriate tools from the full gamut of regulatory intervention in order to deal with it. So in some cases, foot and mouth outbreak, for example, you'll write down the rules end, aren't you? Stop movement and that's it. But when it comes to making the sorts of changes that we now need to make for society as a whole, you're increasingly at the other end of the spectrum, which is about incentivisation, proper incentivisation. It is certainly about providing support, explaining why, for example. I've been down a few farm tracks. I was once chief exec of animal health in England, for example. I haven't been down so many here, but I do understand that farmers are much more likely to make change if they understand the positive benefits to come from it and if they are incentivised to do so. And, certainly, supporting farmers financially any which way has a significant part to play if you're trying to move the industry to a different place. But guidance as well, and that's quite difficult because you need the skills and ability to do it, But I do think it's a significant gap across agriculture, probably here, but, and in England as well. We used to be much better at it. We had systems for doing it. They seem to have fallen by the wayside, and there's a cost to that. So I would entirely agree, and I would hope that OEP would as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Just I'll be brief, Chair, but there are a couple of other issues that I wanted to ask you about. On the nutrients, so you said in your report, you referred that you'd done some research and those findings to be published shortly.
Yes.
Any idea roughly when that might be available? Just roughly.
On nutrients.
So one of the ways in which we work is to commission research from other suppliers, and then we put that in the context in making our decisions on what we do next. So at the time we make the decisions, we tend to publish the supporting evidence that we've commissioned. So we'll do that at the time that we decide what to happen next. But that's the work that my colleague Donnacha mentioned about understanding the wastewater system and understanding the current nutrient regulations and the proposed nutrient regulations as well.
Well, now, could I just ask two fairly brief questions? If you could expand a wee bit on the pressures affecting biodiversity, and I'll ask the second question as well rather than having to go into that in more detail. You refer to new and emerging pollutants entering the watercourse and systems there, and that those may not in fact be regulated within the current WFD regulations. Having looked at your graphic there, it's quite scary. In fact, it's very scary that those pollutants could be entering the watercourses, and that they're established. A couple of them there, in fact, one's very high risk, the other two are very high risk, and two are high risk. Who's the determinant factor or who's the determinant body or whatever it is that assesses and evaluates their risk?
Okay.
That speaks to a wider point around chemicals regulation.
Yes.
And it's particularly challenging here in Northern Ireland, given that it's subject to European regulations, which brings some advantages in this area, because it means that it has access to all of the risk assessment information that European agencies have. Meanwhile, GB is still finding its feet and has actually a long way to go, and has slightly drifted with its development of its own chemicals strategy. So this is a common problem across the GB now as well, that these new and emerging chemicals are not adequately addressed, and the regulatory provisions are not sufficiently well developed.
So the risk rating, that's an EU risk rating, is it?
Yeah, no, that particular one picks out those chemicals because of a lack of understanding of their dynamics and poor provision of regulation. So
I'm a wee bit lost. If there's a lack of understanding of their dynamics, how then is it evaluated that they're very high risk or high risk?
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Yeah, it's often because of the characteristics of the chemicals. So it's how they bear similarity to others and their mode of action, and a building evidence base of their impacts. So yeah.
And that's built by whom? Who builds that evidence?
Well, in European case, it'd be the European Chemicals Agency, but then there's also information from the US EPA, obviously, as another reliable source of information.
So, Chair, bringing it back then, probably what we would need to ask as a committee is, if these are very high risk and high risk then, and there isn't any regulation covering them, then it would be for the department to let us know how they're addressing this too. Would that be the case?
I'd imagine so, if it's been furnished to them, yeah.
Because actually looking at how it's presented there, that's very worrying. Yeah. So, okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yes, sir, very welcome. Been a farmer myself all my life, I think, and for most farmers in the community wants to see better water quality. It's very important. You did mention fertiliser usage. My understanding is that fertiliser usage is down by about 35 or 6%. This last number of years, is that not feeding through into the water quality as yet? I see 31% of surface water bodies are in good condition. How does that compare with 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
Right, okay. And your understanding is that, if I've heard you correctly, that the use of these fertilisers has reduced by a third in the last 10 years. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
So maybe it's John myself might take that. So in terms of the nutrient surplus in Northern Ireland, fertilisers has gone down, you're correct, but feed has gone up quite significantly. And feed is the dominant, is 82% of the phosphorus surplus is made up of feed, and about 50% of the of the nitrogen surplus. So, and also in terms of over the last 10, 15 years, there was a very good improvement in water quality, but it started to creep back up again in the last 10, 12 years. Now we've seen improvement in the last year, which is welcome. So when the 2024 results come out, we'll be able to make a further assessment of that. But I think in the last 10 years, 15 years, the general trend, particularly in phosphorus, has been for phosphorus concentrations in our rivers to go up. And that is, and DAERA have shown those stats that there's a very strong relationship between that and the nutrient surplus, which links to feed and to fertiliser.
You did say there's been some improvement.
Last year, for 1 year. Yeah.
You would accept that any action taken, I know it's not your decision, should be reasonable, and that overreaction could damage our industry. We're very thriving agri-food sector, and it's important that we don't lose thousands of jobs in Northern Ireland, so it's important it's not an overreaction. Would you accept that?
I would say on behalf of the OEP that we quite appreciate there are some sensitive and difficult political decisions here, well above our pay grade actually, but we are telling you and providing the evidence base upon which we hope you'll use to make wise decisions. And it's very clear to us that the way things are at the moment cannot be sustained. It will not be possible to farm in this way to this extent in future because of the damage that is being done to your waters and to your land. So yes, there are consequences, aren't there? Particularly given the historical approach to growth here in Northern Ireland and the dependency on agri-food. We are showing you, if you like, holding a mirror up to show what's actually happening and what the impact is, and trying to use some foresight to show you what's going to get worse if it carries on as it is. Now, yes, it's then for others to make wise decisions, and I quite see your point. But our job is to show you how things are and how things, as far as we can, how things will be. Robbie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I thought it might be helpful to speak a little bit about the scale here. And we're quite careful, as Donnacha's already said, to highlight that this is an industry as a whole that we're taking this view on. And so when I talk about scale, like the importation of phosphorus, let's just deal with phosphorus in the first instance. The importation of phosphorus in animal feeds is just shy of 12,000 tonnes a year. And then, as Dame Glenys has mentioned, fertilisers is about 4,000 tonnes a year. And then that is actually in excess of requirements, both for growing grass and for feeding cattle, feeding other livestock, to the extent that the surplus going into the soil is more than 7,000 tonnes a year. That's in excess of what is required. And 40% of the soils are above the optimum for growing conditions in Northern Ireland. So that's the size of the issue. So it's importation of animal feeds and mineral fertilisers. And then at the other end, of course, there's the food processing and export side of the industry, which is obviously a very big concern. But there isn't enough export of nutrients. So the nutrients that are left behind in excess go into the soil here and then are discharged into water. So just to give you a sense of the order of magnitude as well, the discharges to water are about 940 tonnes into the whole of Northern Ireland's fresh water from agriculture. And then from wastewater is about 360. So the problem, if you like, in water is being caused by about 1,200, 1,300 tonnes a year. But the excess going into soil is several times greater than that. And the importation of phosphorus in feeds and fertilisers is greater than that again. So if you follow where the scale is, the attention really ought to be paid to the importation of these excess phosphorus and nutrients in animal feeds and in fertilisers.
Okay.
Incidentally, if I may, I'm sorry, Chair. One of the real strengths that we have here in Northern Ireland is the quality of the scientific evidence base. Yes. And so the figures that I'm quoting from you here are part of a collaborative piece of work between AFBI and Lancaster University, and it provides an extremely strong and reliable body of evidence on which to base deliberations and decisions.
Is that 40%? achieve the 40% calculation of the soil analysis? Is that done by soil analysis? Is that done based on the calculation of feed and nutrient load?
Well, I might let Donnacha come in on that, but it's a substance flow analysis that shows where it comes in and then each stage of the process and then what's left behind effectively.
Yeah, that would come from the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, where they're showing that roughly 40% of soils are above the agronomic optimum in Northern Ireland, and it's done by soil analysis.
William?
Okay.
And Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. Just to come in on the back of that again, and it appears that if some pollution incident happens in Northern Ireland, the finger of blame is pointed at the farming community. Farming community are the custodians of the countryside. They do what they can and have done over the years to comply with the environmental standards as set by the department, and we have so, as my colleague has said, about the reduction of fertiliser over the past number of years. There's been a new report that has been, a new study that has been done by Oxford University, and it shows that sewage release is much worse for rivers than agriculture. What weight do you put in that report? Because it appears that these Northern Ireland Water and these other sewage companies can put whatever pollution they like into the rivers and the waterways, and there's no lookout on them. And if we do take a look at the nutrient programme and proposals that's been brought forward by the Minister, it focuses solely on the farming community. And yet in all, despite all of the wastewater that's been pumped into the rivers, it appears that there's a blind eye being turned to them. They can do as they like, and yet this study shows that that's causing much more damage to the waterways than from the agricultural industry.
Thank you for that. And of course, it's absolutely right that we strike the right balance here, isn't it, in terms of looking where the solutions might lie. And indeed, that was the whole kind of rationale behind us doing, first of all, our drivers and pressures report, where we were keen to do some myth busting and actually identify how things truly were. And Robbie, you will want to give a bit more information about those respective pressures, because we do recognise it's not simply about farming or even agri-food. There are other pressures, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Glenys. I think we're at pains to point out that there are two problems here and two sets of solutions, and both of them are important. So understand that there's a question about the relative importance of nutrient sources from agri-food industry and from wastewater treatment plants, but what is beyond doubt is that both are important. The exact balance between them, I think there's actually very solid evidence of the relative importance of agri-food industry sources in the numbers that I was just relating, but I won't repeat them. So from our point of view, we are interested in both sets of problems and in both sets of solutions. So we are interested in reduction of the nutrient surplus arising from the agri-food industry, but as Natalie's already highlighted, we're paying close attention to what NI Water is doing, and particularly the case of Belfast Lough. So Belfast Lough and Lough Neagh present two very serious and vivid illustrations of both problems, and our attention will be paid to both of them.
And what proposals or recommendations then have you put forward for NI Water to adhere to in order to reduce the amount of waste that they're putting into the waterways? Because I notice on this here, most of this is all based on the farming agricultural community.
So, sorry, one of you two will know.
Well, if you don't know, John is leading on the wastewater project, so John, you want to?
Yeah.
The issues in relation to the impact of pollution obviously depend on dilution, on volume of flow, etc. We are acutely aware of the discharges of sewage, and discharges of particularly untreated sewage are of major concern to all of us. We're currently working on a very detailed evaluation and risk assessment of the nutrients affecting particularly our protected areas, entirely from wastewater. There's nothing actually to do with agriculture in that contract, in that programme. To look at that, we have taken evidence from Department for Infrastructure, DAERA, Northern Ireland Environment Agency. We are looking at not only the wastewater treatment works, but the associated networks. We're looking also at the input of septic tanks, particularly on managed septic tanks. And we're looking at those industrial discharges that are outside of the Northern Ireland water network, quite common for some of the bigger discharges. The emphasis here is not on pursuing a specific industry. The emphasis here is on finding a proper evidence-led basis for which to take forward the next step, which is to look at those nutrient loads coming from wastewater. One of the big issues, and it does go back to previous questions, is when we start to look at some of the issues of wastewater. For example, if we found a wastewater treatment works that's chronically overloaded, or a network that's chronically overloaded, from an environmental perspective, it's very clear to us that needs to be addressed, that the quality of the discharge needs to be improved, that there is environmental damage occurring. Conversely, and outside of the environmental consequences, the societal consequences are probably a prohibition on development in that catchment until those issues are resolved. So yes, we are looking in great detail at the moment at those in the background. In terms of the effect of sewage pollution, and the range, I haven't seen the report that you referenced, but there is a range of issues, and the range of issues includes the nutrient loading, the effect on fish and invertebrate life, but also the potential for ubiquitous chemicals to be carried through the wastewater treatment system. So it is something that we are looking at in some detail.
Might also help you to know, give you some assurance that we're just coming to the end of a long and complex investigation in England in relation to combined sewage overflows. We've learnt a lot through that, and I hope we're coming to a successful conclusion where things will change materially for the better. We are bearing all of that into account as we now look about how we can be most effective in relation to this particular issue in Northern Ireland. So we're not unaware of the potential there, are we, Natalie? No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's that session now. Drawn to a conclusion. Did you?
Yeah, just a quick question, and it might seem a silly question here, but could any road digesters be of some help in dealing with some of the situation, dealing with the nutrients out of the manure from animals?
Do we have a suggestion for taking nutrients out of the manure of animals?
Yes.
Let's ask our chief scientist.
So I understand that you're receiving a briefing later on in the day about the sustainable utilisation of livestock slurries and the SOLS report. We had a similar briefing ourselves yesterday. I can see that has a potential role in reducing some of the phosphorus from this system. It's far from a silver bullet, and it is an early stage of development, but we were assured that it was promising progress that had been made there, but it is far from the whole solution. It's part of taking something out of the system, which is good, but it doesn't address the inputs to the system and the excesses that I've described. And that obviously includes the anaerobic digestion as a major part of the system and the proposal that I'm sure you'll hear about later from those who are doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. We'll probably touch on that a little bit again in this next session, but we're going to ask if you would, because we've really, that was an extensive session in the first two pieces. We have another two pieces. If you have a brief that you could give us on the drivers and pressures on nature and the protected sites report, and then we'll move to questions on that. So if it could be truncated into the main bullet points, if that's okay.
Start, Robbie?
drivers and pressures, I think, first from Donna.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair. So I will keep this brief because we've covered a lot of the topics already.
Yeah, thank you.
So the drivers and pressures affecting biodiversity was published in October last year, October 15th. It's a non-statutory report compared to the other reports that we're talking about here. The reason for the report was that when we started working in Northern Ireland, we wanted to make sure there was a synthesis and an overall assessment of the evidence that was available in terms of what was causing the decline in the environment and biodiversity in Northern Ireland. So we decided to go out and bring together all that evidence into one place, because it was very clear that there was no one source of evidence that we could rely on. We also wanted to make sure that our decision making in Northern Ireland, and when we took action in Northern Ireland, it was evidence based and it was informed, and we wanted to make sure that we had available all that evidence to us. And finally, we were hoping that it would provide government and other stakeholders with opportunities to identify and prioritise the actions that are required to improve biodiversity in Northern Ireland. So I was going to talk about how we did it, but I'm not going to do that. If you look at our website, you can see we actually did a very robust and comprehensive review here using multiple different sources, and all that information is available on our website. The key findings from that report are based around five main pressures, and that's land use change, pollution, resource use and exploitation, invasive species and climate change. In the report of two principal pressures that we've already mentioned here were land use change and pollution. And agriculture occupies 77% of our land area, and agricultural intensification has been the biggest impact on our decline in biodiversity in Northern Ireland. And we've already referred to the statement about that we say that agriculture in its current form, agri-food system in its current form, is unsustainable. But we're very clear in the report, it's very comprehensive, that there are other pressures that need to be addressed, and we do highlight very clearly that nutrients from wastewater is unsustainable and bears equal responsibility for the current situation that we find ourselves in. The other big thing I would draw your attention to is that while urban and rural development might be quite small in terms of it only occupies maybe 5-6% of the land area, it actually is an important pressure, because one single house in the landscape doesn't have much of an impact, but when you link that to a nearby mine or nearby wind farm, or you link it to a new stretch of road, when you accumulate that up, it actually causes significant habitat fragmentation and species disturbance. So it's that cumulative impact of urban and rural development that we're interested in. We've already mentioned chemical pollution here, so I won't focus in on that. It is a significant issue that we are concerned with. Resource use and exploitation was something that we felt was it is a big pressure, and it isn't given enough attention in terms of its impact. In Northern Ireland, we are currently consuming 16.6 tonnes or 9 tonnes of material per year individually. We need to be around 6 to 8 tonnes to actually be sustainable. So there's a big challenge there across society to actually address that, and we do highlight that quite strongly in the report. We address the issue of invasive species, and there is a very strong evidence base there on how invasive species need to be addressed. The big concern is that being implemented correctly, especially in the face of climate change, where you have potentially 40 species that are at risk of coming into Northern Ireland in the near future. The other one then is climate change, a big issue, and one of the big areas of concern that we had with climate change was that while there's a lot of understanding about what's happening with climate change, the impact that's going to have on the environment and species is not really well understood in Northern Ireland, and that's going to have real big implications in terms of the effectiveness of everything from the Nutrient Action Programme to the Nature Recovery Strategy and all of those strategies. Another key issue for us was around the combined pressures. One pressure, very often you don't find a habitat is impacted by one pressure. Its habitat is impacted by multiple pressures, and that's not addressed sufficiently within current policy. Lough Neagh is probably the best example of that, and I was going to give a bit more detail on that, but I think we all understand the multiple pressures that are on Lough Neagh. So just getting to the key recommendations, and some of these we've already addressed. We made 4 key recommendations. This wasn't a solutions report. We weren't providing solutions there. We were just focusing in on the historical impacts that different pressures had. But what we did recommend was that nutrient pollution and dealing with the nutrient pollution issue has to be forefront in terms of priorities for government. And that's both agriculture and wastewater. Both are unsustainable. We also were very concerned in relation to the change in land use, and that space needs to be made for nature. And we welcome that, the announcement that Farming for Nature is coming forward in June. The key thing there is uptake, and uptake of those measures, and getting that uptake at a level that is going to make space for nature is really, really important. I've already mentioned the material footprint. That's something that government needs to address really quickly. And then finally, I think in some ways this goes without saying, but Lough Neagh is that red flag. We need to act urgently and effectively, or we're going to have more Lough Neaghs in multiple habitats. And then finally, what has come out of that report? Well, it's informed all the work we're doing in terms of our nutrients work. It will inform all of our work around agri-environment. It will inform our work around chemicals. And also, very importantly, it will inform our work around the Environmental Improvement Plan, which was published last year, and it will inform how the assessment and scrutiny we have of government through our Environmental Improvement Plan. So there's a slimmed down version. Hopefully it didn't go too fast.
Appreciate that. In terms of the protected sites, is that encompassing Lough Neagh? Do you want to do that?
Would you like me to take that now?
Yeah, could you take that now, please? Yeah.
So our starting point for the protected sites work is really that these are Northern Ireland's natural treasures. This isn't a sort of a detailed technical evaluation of what's important. These are the places that everybody knows about. It's the Mournes, it's the North Antrim coast, it's the Sperrins and the Antrim Hills, Strangford and so on. So these are places that are vital to Northern Ireland society and its economy. And yet we see that their condition is deteriorating, and we see that the designations of sites that should have been taking place have not been taking place. So it isn't a system that is working effectively, really by virtue of those two main statistics, that 62% of the features of ASSIs, which would be the main domestic classification of a protected site, are in favourable condition in 2008, and that's dropped to 51.5%. There's actually a target that figure should be 95%. So there is a long, long way to go, and things are going in the wrong direction. And effectively, protected sites designation halted in 2018. When in fact a number of sites had previously been identified that were of special scientific interest, were important to protect, and have not received that protection. So this is a piece of work really that was again about a legal system that, if it were implemented effectively, would have provided protections, but was not being implemented effectively. And I'm afraid most of the shortcomings lay with government in this instance. And we made a number of recommendations to make sure that Northern Ireland no longer lags behind the rest of the UK, Ireland and Europe in restarting its designation of protected sites to turn things around. We do know that it can be made to work well. So there were periods in the 90s when site designation really was going great guns, and large areas of land were designated. Unfortunately, government tends only to be able to do one thing at a time. So whilst it was designating sites, it was not then monitoring and ensuring their favourable condition. And when it was paying attention to condition, it then halted its work on designation. So it needs to do both things at once. These are important sites. There are some tools available. If we look internally in government, Northern Ireland Water as a public body and Forest Service need to do more to attend to the protected sites that are in their custody. And ultimately, these are, in addition to being natural treasures, there are legal obligations and international obligations. So 30 by 30 relates to the protection of at least 30% of land and sea by 2030, and to make sure that's in effective management. And what we're seeing here falls far short of that.
Very much. Thank you for your presentation. On those, so we'll just open it up to members. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. On the drivers and pressures on nature, firstly, I did read in the executive summary in the drivers and pressures on nature that it states that there's a line in here. Now, I'm not saying it contradicts the line above it, but it jumped out at me last night. It states that nutrient pollution from farming likely, and I underline the word likely, has a greater impact on biodiversity than that from sewage. And when I hear a word like likely, and I think about the way we write legislation, the difference between a word like should and must, it just strikes me that there's a question to be asked. So, and it is a very emotive subject at the moment, because we are hearing a range of various views from stakeholders in and around the sector about the main pollution and how we're going to tackle those. But the word likely would lead me to believe there's maybe not such a clear-cut answer. Could you give me an understanding of the basis for your use of the word likely?
Absolutely. And we did use the word likely purposefully. But Donnacha, please do expand on
So
it.
there's a slight difference, just to clarify here. So in terms of nutrients into water, we're clear that both agriculture and wastewater are roughly equally to blame in terms of those contributions. But when you're looking at nutrients in its totality, and you mean ammonia loss to air, with nitrous oxide loss, then when you look at it in the total nutrients, then it's quite likely that agriculture has a bigger impact across aquatic and terrestrial habitats. Now, the reason we use the word likely is because there's no evidence, strong evidence, that shows the combined impact. So that's the reason, as in there is not strong evidence to show that definitely both of those combined stack up to be bigger than wastewater. But that evidence should be made available, because nutrients need to be managed in their entirety. At the moment, it's quite a disaggregated approach. You have a nutrient action program, you have ammonia being dealt with separately, when in fact they should be dealt with together.
I might add, Chair, what we are have high confidence in is that both are very bad. So the likely applies to which has the greater sum total impact, but both have severe impacts, both in terrestrial and freshwater environments. So when I said earlier about there being two problems with two different sets of solutions, it may not be all that helpful to determine which is the most important, because there are different avenues that you go down in evaluating which way you go in future. So that's why we qualify the likely, because of a technical issue to do with the sum total of impact on biodiversity, but it is beyond any doubt that both are of great significance.
Go back to a point, I don't know if it was William or Thomas had made the point earlier on, that your report is based on evidence up to about 2023, I think, assessments and tests, but there is some evidence emerging that there has been improvements in regard to the nitrate load, particularly in waters and testing and stuff. I've asked a question about inorganic dissolved nitrates testing in waters, but I haven't received a satisfactory response from the department, so it's not the question for you. Is it your understanding that the department is regularly testing for inorganic dissolved nitrates in the waterways in a timely fashion to adjust our rate of attack to come up with the solution that everybody so desires?
You're referring to dissolved inorganic in coastal areas. That is part of the Water Framework Directive, John, am I correct? Yeah. It is monitored as part of the Water Framework Directive in coastal areas.
I think it's, short-term changes here may well happen. There's going to be a lot of between-year variation in weather conditions and in farming practices. So it wouldn't be at all surprising if there were short-lived upturns in condition. So you'd have to look in the long run. Yeah. And what we do know is that we're dealing here with a chronic problem that will take many years to resolve, and the action taken required to mitigate that needs to happen now, but it may well be that the benefits do not materialise for some time.
And two short questions. I'll rope these in together. They don't necessarily sit well together, but in the interest of time and brevity. We had a briefing recently, and it's a food strategy that they were working on. And one of the things that was, and you guys have picked it up, is the consumption that we have here. And then what we picked out of that report was the waste food. Now, DAERA suggested we have a very high level of food waste, disproportionate. Have you any thoughts in regards to how that is changed and what the powers are to direct change perhaps in that? And that's a societal thing. It's very difficult to do, I would suggest. There is talk about use of food waste for anaerobic digestion in terms of energy production. And then this last one, which is a big one, obviously, you talk about the importation of food, but we do know there are geopolitical pressures. So food security, I would suggest, is a massive issue for these islands, and potentially with the geopolitical situation around the world and whoever's in power in different places. We saw it pop up with Ukraine, for instance, when there were serious difficulties in obtaining animal feed around the globe. So what impact does that have? Does food security have? Because that's a significant part of our input into our population in regard to the environmental catastrophe that's unfolding that we need to deal with at the same time.
If I can deal with that second question first, and then thankfully pass the first question over to Donnacha. So on food security, again, I have to caveat this, that it's not a matter for the OEP, but we do recognise it is a very much a significant issue and coming up as yet more because of Ukraine and other global conflicts, and it's the same in England as well. And of course you'll have a greater interest in food security than we might have had even 2 years ago. But we're also aware, and I've seen different figures on this, but the extent to which Northern Ireland is producing much more food than it actually consumes by an order of magnitude. As if I understood this correctly, you are about as secure as it comes when it comes to food security, not in terms of every type of food, but in terms of the sheer scale of production here. That production could be scaled back significantly, and you still find it hard to argue that you are not secure in terms of food supply, although, as to pricing or variety, that would be a different matter. So it's predominantly a political matter and a matter of policy. It is a significant matter across the world at large, but we are very much aware about just the sheer size and scale of production here.
Just to finish that one, the production but is valued at around, in total, £10 billion a year of our economy, which is about almost $3 billion for farming and agri and 6.7 for food and beverages and drinks. So it's also, that's why the analysis of the politicians and the executive is to determine there is a prosperity that we need to, obviously the prosperity of the environment, but the prosperity of the people is also the balance that needs to be struck.
We do sort of totally, I'll come to you in a minute, we do totally recognise that. And of course we can see that historically, certainly over the last decade, one might argue you've had a lot of eggs in one basket. There's been a lot of emphasis on the growth that can be afforded through the agri-food industry. And I can see that if you have the determination now to sustain your environments and nurture biodiversity, it does present a particular challenge for you in terms of where you look for growth. But of course everyone in the world's looking for growth. It turns out to be very difficult at the moment. But Robbie, do you want to add anything?
I think you're right to highlight the relationship between food security and particularly in relation to food imports and how that relates to the environmental challenge. With those numbers I was giving earlier, about 12,000 tonnes of phosphorus, currently the agri-food system is dependent on that as an importation. And that's coming from parts of the world that are experiencing their own environmental problems. So at present, there is a great reliance on importing an excess, which then creates this pollution problem in the waters of Northern Ireland. So a better system would be one that was more circular, where more of the nutrients were maintained within Northern Ireland and reduced the importation and reduced the losses to the environment. So there is a very clear link between a more secure food system and improvement of the natural environment.
Absolutely endorse that, but back to question one. And
so the food strategy is, we haven't read it in detail yet, okay, it is on my to-do list to look at, but in terms of consumption is a really important issue here. I was interested to hear you saying there that it's about getting the excess food out into AD plants, and I think the bigger issue is actually dealing with it along the whole logistics chain. There's a figure out there in relation to globally we lose 40 to 50% of our food before it actually gets onto our plates, and then it's lost. So I think the key thing here is dealing with it from harvest, transport, supermarkets, right into households. And the key thing, I think, how this links with with the environment is if we can reduce food waste, we don't need to be so intensive in terms of our food production, because more of our food is getting onto our plates, and that's the key link there for us. But we haven't looked at it in any detail at this point.
It's an interesting concept, actually, that piece. Thank you. Declan.
Thank you. I just want to mention the concept of just transition, and do you appreciate the importance of taking a just transition approach to dealing with farmers and agri-food sector when we're going on this the journey to reducing the P and for example?
Yes, I think I've said publicly on more than one occasion that those who drive tractors need to drive change. They are in the forefront. in terms of leading change. I think the prospect of them doing that is going to reduce materially if they don't feel they're justly treated. It's obvious.
And just a wee second point as well. We talked about food security. Have you considered, or do you see the potential of, the byproducts of our food production being used to improve our energy security? Because the products from the agri-food sector, for some might see it as a problem, but for increasingly many are seeing it as an opportunity, as a resource. And we have seen in its infancy at this stage the likes of the Sustainable Utilisation of Livestock scheme, the AD plants, and indeed the soil sampling scheme. So do you see the benefits of how a product that many might see as a problem, when actually in fact more and more people, if used properly, can contribute to our energy security and actually become a resource?
Thank you, and I'll ask Robbie to deal with that in a minute, but just to say that as we talk about this, we must all keep in mind just the sheer size of the problem. Robbie?
Yeah. The general point, I think, is one that we should be encouraging a circular economy, so that waste is no longer really viewed as something that is either exported or buried in the ground or put out at sea, but is a resource in itself. So that speaks to the value of the scheme that you'll hear about this afternoon. There are, as I understand it, some significant infrastructure challenges in using the product from anaerobic digesters, and in that there isn't a natural gas infrastructure across most of Northern Ireland. But the general point that we need to look at waste as a resource, so you minimise the creation of waste and then maximise the utilisation of it and create a circular economy, and that really does address the issue that we're prioritising around nutrients too, because the things that are going into the water as waste are the very same things that we're importing as a resource.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I tried to get in on protected sites there, and I know we were dealing with a number of issues in a condensed time, so if you don't mind, it's a very quick question. You may not know, and I understand if you don't, it's something perhaps we could try to discover for ourselves, but do you know how many of the protected sites in Northern Ireland are already in public ownership, or are publicly supported or publicly funded? Because that should be key in trying to do better in this regard.
Actually, there is no answer to that question, although it's an obvious question and we've asked it and we don't get an exact answer. So we know that public bodies are very major landowners, so that's why we picked out NI Water and the Forest Service. And we suspect that by the time you add in Ministry of Defence, for example, and then local authorities, that you add up to a very sizable chunk of the landowning responsibility. So one of our recommendations in that report is that DAERA initiates the formation of a major landowners group similar to what there is in England, to really just act at the largest scale. And it's important, I think, that public sector organisations lead in that area. And that's why I said earlier, in that particular report, much of our critique was aimed at government rather than small landowners, occupiers, who frankly are often bewildered by the way in which government behaves in respect to protected sites, and we can understand and sympathise with that position. So yeah, there's a lot more that could be done by the public sector.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. I think it has to be said there's a huge amount to be done with regard to biodiversity. If you looked at that public estate and also the joined up working piece as well, perhaps. Chair, just secondly, if I may, and while everyone's here, I'll make this request. Tom helpfully referenced earlier the Oxford University report, which others, including myself, have spoken about before. I looked at this some time ago. I think it's based in GB Rivers.
Yes.
But can we, for the information of the committee, get that clarified so that we know? Because the proportionality there of the sectoral inputs and outputs, for example, would be different and perhaps very different. But I think it would be good to have it on the record whether or not it relates at all to Northern Ireland.
Yeah, thank you, John. Robbie, did you want to come in that?
I'm not aware of the specific study that you're talking about. Oxford produces a lot of work, so but if it's something that you'd like us to be aware of or express a view on, then I'd happily give that some consideration.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll pick that up through the yes, okay, thank you. Thank you very much, John. And Patsy?
Just a very brief one. Now, I listened to the theory of the circular economy there in regard to importation of grains, but quite a few of those grains can't be grown locally.
Yeah.
So what's the answer to that conundrum, if there is one?
Well, there is a heavy reliance on imported feed, so that creates this food security challenge. I think what we're suggesting here is that you need to look at the system as a whole and look at where the nutrients are imported and created. So that's, for example, in the importation of fertilizers and then the reapplication of slurries to fertilize silage-growing fields. So you have to look at it in the round. I mean, I've no doubt that there will be an ongoing requirement to import animal feeds.
Yes.
But the ones that are currently being imported are the ones that contain more phosphorus than the animals require for their nutritional requirements.
But my point is, if the ones that are being reported are the ones with the high concentrates of phosphates, say, right? I'm no scientist, I'm reliant on people like yourself to provide me with that information. If those aren't grown locally, can't be grown locally because of whatever it is, the environment, the atmosphere, whatever it might be, just the type of land, there clearly isn't an answer to that. Animals still have to be fed.
Yes. Yeah, but there's McDonald, yeah.
So I suppose there's three things here. Firstly, there needs to be a reduction of the nutrient content of the feeds as far as possible. Okay, and that is something that the industry is trying to tackle. Can they come further down? That's an economic question. The second thing then is around better utilisation of grass. A lot of farmers are using feed concentrate instead of possibly utilising grass to its best. Okay. And that's just comes down to probably better nutrient management practices. And you've seen very clearly in some of the studies that were done in some of the catchments here in relation to AFBI and DAERA's data, where they've improved nutrient management, they've reduced the fertiliser use, they've reduced the feed use of the cattle, and it's reduced the nutrient surplus and had a knock-on impact on water quality. So the evidence is there that it can be brought down on a lot of farms without significantly impacting on production on those farms.
Specifically in regard to foodstuffs?
Animal feed stuff. Are you talking?
Yes, that's what
I'm animal feed. Specifically in relation to the evidence there that a lot of farms can improve their nutrient management, pulling down the feed content that's going into the system, pulling down the fertiliser content, while still being productive. And economically
reducing losses to water.
And reducing losses to water. The evidence is very strong there from AFBI and DAERA.
So it may well be helpful, Chair, if we were to send you information about that evidence, please.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks very much.
Thanks, members content? Thomas?
One question, Chair. I noticed that one of your findings was, or the two principal pressures causing biodiversity loss on our land use change and pollution. Throughout my entire constituency, there's a proposal for a new roadway that's going right through that, covering 85 kilometres, cutting through something like 300 hectares of land. Quite a bit of hedgerow has been removed, trees cut down. What concerns would you have that for impact on the environment or biodiversity loss throughout that entire area?
Well, they'd be pretty well the same concerns that we've already expressed, wouldn't they, about general land use change. I think the issue here that we've particularly focused on is just the scale, the amount of land use change that has occurred, Chair, in recent years. It is a surprising amount, and we make that point in our report. Road construction, has a particular impact on the environment. Of course it does, and those impacts are well known. But Donna, did you want to say anything?
I suppose I'll just be repeating possibly what I've said earlier, and it's in the report that we do have concern about those cumulative impacts of the new stretch of road combined with other infrastructure and how that's causing habitat fragmentation and disturbance of species. So it is a concern.
It is very much the totality of land use change in recent years, as I say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members, yep. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. It was slightly extended, that turned into a 2-hour session. I'm particularly grateful for those who've had to travel greater distances to be here. That's much appreciated to do something of such magnitude in person as opposed to online, because I don't think
Delighted to see that we don't quite outnumber you, so that was good.
you did well. You have a tag team in the corner, was duly noted. We'll maybe bring a tag team in with us next time. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Members, before we move on to agenda item 7, which is the Farm with Nature Scheme regulations, I'm going to suggest we take a very, very, very quick 5-minute break. I'd like to restart at just after 12:10. So if we can take a temporary moment. Thank you. Is the SL Farm with Nature Scheme regulations. I refer you to pages 673 to 690 of the pack for this item, which is, includes the draft SR and the explanatory memorandum, which starts at page 678. The Department intends to delay the SR to provide it with the legal powers to implement the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme, part of the Farming with Nature package. The SR will be led before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure, and subject to executive approval. It's anticipated that it will come into operation on a date to be agreed in June. Welcome the following department officials to brief the committee on the SL1. We have Zita, Hale, Deputy Director of Agriculture Policy Division, Manus McHenry, Deputy Director of Agriculture Policy Division, and Ms Devina, Head of Farming with Nature Transition Policy. Thank you so much. Our last session ran over quite a bit, so you had an extended wait, so thank you for your patience. And if you would like to brief the committee, they do have your papers in their packs, but if you would like to give us an high-level brief, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Chairman, for the opportunity to provide the committee with a briefing on DAERA's plans to introduce the Farming with Nature Scheme regulations, Northern Ireland 2025. You received the draft regulations along with the SLA in your pack, which sets out the purpose of the legislation, and we previously provided the committee with an oral briefing on the proposals for the Farming with Nature package. With your permission, Mr Chairman, I would like to give you and members a short overview of the contents of the draft regulations, including details of the scheme, eligibility requirements, actions available, and the application process. The Farming with Nature Transition Scheme sits within the Farming with Nature package, which forms part of the programme of change being progressed through the DAERA Sustainable Agriculture Programme. It aims to contribute to the delivery of many of DAERA's strategic environmental outcomes by supporting farmers and land managers to make substantial contributions to environmental improvements and sustainability. The Farming with Nature package aims to increase the extent and improve the quality of habitats on agricultural land while improving the connectivity between habitats. It is planned that the Farming with Nature package will be introduced using a phased approach. It will comprise 3 phases, with the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme as phase 1. The Farming with Nature Transition Scheme has been developed through an engagement process that includes the Agriculture Policy Stakeholder Group and the Farming with Nature Working Group, which comprise key agriculture and environmental stakeholders. Internally, within DAERA, there is ongoing engagement across a number of business areas, including design, delivery and inspection branches. This scheme aims to improve biodiversity on farms by funding a range of environmental actions. It will underpin the overall package and allow farmers to implement actions that will deliver additional habitats, protect watercourses, provide green infrastructure for nature corridors, and increase carbon sequestration. The Farming with Nature Scheme Regulations 2025 are intended to give DAERA the legal powers to introduce the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme and provide for payments to be made by the Department to eligible farm businesses, which meet the requirements for scheme actions and supporting items. In 2025, it is planned that the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme will focus on farmland outside designated land and other priority habitat areas. 5 options will be available initially, with plans to introduce further actions in 2026. These 5 options are planting of new hedgerows, creation of riparian buffer strips, farmland tree planting, multi-species winter cover crop, and the retention of winter stubble. Devina will provide some detail later. It is planned to further develop the scheme for year 2 to offer a wider range of actions with Early proposals including the provision of wild bird winter feed crop. In addition, there will be a number of supporting items to assist the implementation of actions. These will not be mandatory for all actions, but can be selected to suit individual farm requirements, depending on the action involved. Examples of supporting items include fencing to protect hedgerows and riparian buffer strips. It is planned that the scheme will open on an annual basis, and farm businesses interested in applying must meet the eligibility criteria for the scheme. The first tranche of the scheme will only be open to farm businesses in possession of DAERA Category 1 or 2 business identification numbers. Also in the first tranche, farm businesses holding a current EFS agreement, wider or higher, will not be eligible to apply. In 2025, farm businesses participating in the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme must have management control of the fields in which actions are implemented. Educational material and guidance will be available online to ensure that applicants understand the requirements of the scheme and the specifications of each action. All actions must be completed and claimed by the 31st of March 2026 and 31st of March 2027, respectively. In the first tranche of the scheme 2025, it is planned that there will be a cap on the value of individual claims each year. This will be set at $9,500 per farm business. In 2025, the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme will be excluded from the cross-compliance penalty regime. Mr Chairman, I will now pass over to Zita to take you through the provisions of the SR.
Okay,
Zita.
Thank you, Manus. So I'm going to take you through just the provisions of the SR that you have in front of you. And as Manus said, these regulations establish the Farming with Nature scheme and allow the department to provide for payments to eligible farm businesses which meet the scheme actions and supporting item requirements. So skipping through the citation and the commencement and interpretation, I'm going to begin with Regulation 3. That specifies the duration of the scheme, so it will operate for 2 scheme years ending on the 31st of March 2027. Regulation 4 specifies the eligibility criteria for eligible farm businesses. So they must have a Category 1 or 2 business ID number, they must not have an active EFS agreement in place, and they must have management control of the fields in which the eligible scheme actions are implemented. Regulations 5, 6 and 7 specify the eligibility criteria for eligible scheme actions and eligible supporting items, and advises that actions are not permitted on Tier 1, 2 or 3 land, and that's land that tends to be designated as special areas of conservation, special protection areas, Ramsar sites, ASSIs and other designated lands. Regulation 8 specifies on what basis the department will make payment, and it references Schedule 3 as the payment rate list for items and sets the annual scheme cap of £9,500 per annum. Regulation 9 specifies that the cross-compliance penalty regime will not apply to this scheme. Regulation 10 specifies that administrative penalties for over-declaration will not apply to this scheme. Regulation 11 provides that the on-the-spot checks will be 1% rather than 5%. Regulation 12 specifies the use by the Department of LIPIS information to determine if the scheme requirements are met. Regulations 13, 14, 15 and 16 provide the general powers for withholding and recovery of overpayments, powers of authorised persons, assistance to authorised persons, offences and penalties. Then if we just move into the schedule, Schedule 1 will provide the detail on each of the 5 eligible scheme actions that Manus has outlined and Devina will be picking up later. Schedule 2 sets out the criteria for all eligible supporting items. Schedule 3 sets out the associated payment rates for the eligible scheme actions and eligible supporting items. Schedule 4 sets out the list of native hedge plant species eligible for the scheme. And finally, Schedule 5 sets out the list of native tree species eligible for the scheme. So I will now hand you over to Devina, who will provide a more in-depth information on each of the 5 environmental actions and their supporting items.
Thank you. In the first year of the scheme, as mentioned by Manus, there will be 5 environmental actions. These have been selected based on the environmental benefits that they can provide. In comparison to previous agri-environment schemes, This scheme aims to simplify the specifications, making them less prescriptive, and also emphasising the focus on the environmental action and the benefits that each action can deliver. We have moved away from mandatory non-productive investments that we would have seen in, for example, the environmental farming scheme, and we now are involving supporting items which will support the implementation to get the environmental benefit. If I move now to the first action, planting new hedgerows, the aim of this action is to create new lengths of hedgerow planted with native species where no hedge currently exists. Hedgerows provide vital habitats for a wide range of species, including birds, mammals, insects and plants. They serve as nesting sites for birds and mammals and breeding ground for insects. And they also act as corridors connecting different habitat areas, allowing wildlife to move across landscapes. Other benefits include carbon sequestration, reduction of soil erosion and control of water flow. Under the scheme, the minimum length of hedgerow that can be planted is 10 metres, and the hedgerow must be planted with native species as listed in Schedule 4 of the regulations. Protective fencing is available to help scheme participants protect the hedge from grazing livestock and wildlife damage, and a maximum of up to 2 times the length of hedge installed is allowed. A payment of £6.49 per metre is available for this action. Moving to creation of riparian buffer strips. The aim of this action is to create a vegetated riparian buffer strip which will prevent livestock access to watercourses, reducing bankside erosion and reducing the transport of pollutants to the watercourse. It will also provide habitat for wildlife and form links between other habitat areas. Within this action there are 2 options, a 2 metre buffer strip and a 7 metre buffer strip. Buffer strips must be fenced off and protected from damage by livestock. A retention period of 15 years will apply for this action. Gates and posts will be available for this action and are mandatory in the 7 metre option to facilitate watercourse maintenance by Rivers Agency. Drinking water troughs and pasture pumps are also available if required. The payment for a 2 metre riparian buffer strip is £1.41 per metre, and if you include the mandatory fencing, that takes us up to £7.93 per metre. In the 7 metre option, £4.93 per metre of the strip, with the mandatory fencing bringing that payment up to £11.45 per metre. Farmland tree planting is the third action available. And through this action, we aim to integrate native trees on farmed land. Areas of trees can provide habitat for a variety of wildlife, offering nesting sites, food sources, shelter, and also act as wildlife corridors. Trees and understory plants can provide nectar and pollen for bees, butterflies, and other beneficial insects. This action can be integrated across farmland to suit the system in place in plots of a minimum of 0.05 hectares and could, for example, be placed downstream of livestock buildings or to help shelter livestock. Trees must be planted at a rate of 1,600 trees per hectare, and for a 0.05 hectare plot, this equates to 80 trees. A retention period of 20 years applies. The payment rate for farmland tree planting is £6,756 per hectare, and that equates to £337.80 for a 0.05 hectare plot. The retention of winter stubble can provide habitat for birds, small mammals and insects. It offers cover and protection during the winter months when other resources may be scarce. Other benefits include enhanced soil biodiversity through providing food sources for earthworms, for example, and it can also help to prevent soil erosion and increase organic matter content of the soil. This action is available on arable land that is growing a spring sown or autumn sown cereal, oilseed rape, protein crop or linseed. It is not available on stubble following the harvest of maize or undersown crops. The The stubble must be retained following harvest until the 15th of February the following year. The payment rate for this action is £93 per hectare. Multi-species winter cover crop is a new action under agri-environment schemes in Northern Ireland, and the aim of this action is to establish a multi-species cover crop over the winter months between two cash crops to protect soil surface, provide root growth that benefits soil structure, support soil biology and minimise nutrient leaching, soil erosion and runoff. Multi-species cover crops also help to sequester carbon and help reduce nutrient leaching from soils. Again, it's available on arable land. Payment rate for this action is £225 per hectare. 4 supporting items will be available in year 1: protective fencing, gate and 2 posts, drinking water troughs and pasture pumps. As I've already mentioned, in most cases supporting items are not mandatory, except in the case of riparian buffer strips. This is to facilitate prevention of livestock from reaching the watercourse, and the gates and 2 posts are required in a 7-metre strip, as I've mentioned before, to facilitate work by Rivers Agency. It is currently planned to introduce further actions in year 2 of the scheme, and these are under consideration and development, and we're working and engaging with our stakeholder groups on developing those next range of actions. And I'll pass back to Manus now. Thank you.
Okay, Devina, thanks. Just to finish off then in relation to the application process, the scheme and the plan is to open in the middle of June for a period of 6 weeks. The Farming with Nature Transition Scheme is part of DAERA's commitment to digital first service delivery. Application for the scheme will be made through a geospatial online application which can be accessed through DAERA online services. As part of their application, farm businesses must select the action that they wish to complete, an eligible ground over which they have management control, and spatially record it on a map where the action is to be located. The online application system has been designed to be very customer friendly. To assist farm businesses, the application will be pre-populated with field data that has been claimed for as part of the 2024 BPS application. For this land, the application system will indicate the actions that are available for selection. If a farm business has not made a 2024 BPS application, there will be no pre-population of fields. However, they can still add land to their application and select eligible actions. Technical videos recorded by CAFRE are available to view prior to application submission to support applicants' understanding of the actions required. These technical videos, along with guidance sheets and a link to the business rules, will be available on the DAERA website. The online application system will also provide a running total of the application value based on the actions and supporting items that have been added to it. This will allow a farm business to ensure that they submit an application that is within the minimum of £2,500 and maximum of £9,500 application thresholds. During the application window, there will be help available through the use of dedicated email address and the DAERA online helpline number. Digital assistance will be provided initially over the telephone, and a dedicated team can screen share and assist customers with the online application. Farm businesses are strongly encouraged to ensure that all members register for DAERA online account via the government gateway, even if they work with an agent. All communications related to this scheme will be issued electronically. As DAERA continues to expand its digital communication across Agriculture and Environmental Scheme Division, farmers are reminded to regularly check their email inbox for important updates and notifications. Mr. Chairman, that finishes the presentation on the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for that. Really interesting piece of work. One of the areas that I'm very interested in, and there was a joint committee meeting with Ofcom this week in regard to Stiom, is very interested in trees and the ambition of the department for tree planting and the afforestation. But one of the issues with that is where the trees are planted. Would there be any scope for ensuring in this that there's guidance to ensure that the trees aren't planted near power lines or lines and poles that connect us for telecommunications, just to ensure that all of the departments are speaking with one voice, because there is a dearth of good legislation on either hedges or trees. They're brilliant to have, but they make bad neighbours in some ways, depending on the... Would there be scope for that?
Just in relation to the guidance, as part of the application process, Chairman, there will be information around where trees should be planted on the farm.
I know there is some here in regards to, it does give some guidance in that, but specifically with regard to the fact that we have a lot of poles which carry electricity and telecommunications, and then if we get an incident or a storm, which we're told is going to come more often, would it be prudent to ensure that is included as part of the guidance? And maybe it is.
It is included as part of the guidance. There's guidance available, guidance videos and guidance sheets, which will be available as part of the application and online afterwards. And that talks around, we're safe for the environment and safe in terms of power lines and that kind of infrastructure.
Super. Excellent. Okay. Next question then is on the powers of the authorised person. I did pay a bit of attention to that. Now, is that a direct lift from previous powers of authorised person? There's no new powers
No, it's just the standard provisions that come through in all of our regulations.
Okay, cool. Because they're significant. You used to call them standard, but they are also significant. There's significant powers there. Okay, no problem. Thank you for that. And then one particular. This isn't so much about hedgerows, I suppose, but about the buffer strips. So in terms of hedgerows, it's specific to new hedgerows. So you get no credit for maintaining a hedgerow which is already there. I suspect. Maybe that's not the case. But with regard to the buffer strips, for a farmer, and many farmers are already doing this, they already have buffer strips and maintained hedgerows for these reasons. Would they be eligible for a buffer strip that is already in existence, for instance? Or are these for new buffer zones?
For the purposes of this scheme, Chairman, it will be new riparian buffer strips that are introduced onto the farm. And at this stage, in our development, it's addition to the business rather than existing. Yeah.
So just to be clear, a farmer who already meets the 2 and then 7 metre at the moment won't be eligible?
No.
It's a bit draconian. I think there's no incentive there, but I appreciate the straightforward answer. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And final question then. Your paper highlights various approaches being taken across the neighbouring jurisdictions. Could you tell us, is there a system that you guys have in terms of liaising with them directly to learn from the good, the bad and the ugly, or is it like a bit of a tabletop exercise?
In terms of across the regions, is that?
Yeah, different jurisdictions.
We would meet on a regular basis with the folks England, Scotland, Wales, and also with the folks in the south in relation to their schemes. And in our development to date, we're trying to take on board the learning from the schemes that they have introduced and to apply them to ours. And indeed, the phased approach is something that some of those regions are quite envious about. Because it allows you to develop the scheme up in stages rather than to do everything at the one stage, and that has brought its own issues in terms of paying out money and farmers being able to actually implement actions on the farm.
And then the systems is kind of all online and there's technological. So is this already going to be embedded in the systems that are there? This doesn't require new systems, does it?
For the purposes of this scheme, yeah,
yes.
It's a new system that has been developed up,
okay.
To allow farmers to apply into it. The fact that we're actually spatially applying the actions on the farm is something very new and something that's going to be very beneficial going forward. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Declan.
Thanks. I welcome this presentation. Thank you very much. Just a couple of questions, I suppose. In terms of the payment, do the farmers or the landowners, do they carry out the works and claim it retrospectively, or does the department pay them up front before they carry out the works?
If I just take you through the application process, Declan, so that the farmer will apply to do a range of measures on their farm, okay? Yeah. They will then take that forward and actually implement on the farm. Yeah. Then they will apply for the work that they have completed. And following that they then will receive payment. So that's the order that it should take place. Okay.
So they apply retrospectively.
That's right, yeah.
in terms of the timing, the timing of it, okay, I know like the autumn times are good enough for planting hedges and all, but for fencing, you know, you're fencing during winter months when the land is in the best of shape, you know, and the works have to be carried out by the end of March. Is that viable? Like, is there no flexibility of that at all? Does it have to be done within the financial year? Is there any, you know?
Fortunately, Declan, with the way the scheme is designed and the budget for the year, the work has to be completed within the year. Now, I know if you were to get a particularly difficult and wet winter, that will present challenges, as it has done in the past. And I mean, it will be kept under review, is all I can say, Declan. But as it stands at the minute, the farmers will have to complete that work during that period.
Because you know, it can be very, if you have a wet November, December, January, February, it's not the best time to be out fencing. Yeah. And finally, the other thing, Chair, I want to ask is, see, in terms of the tree planting as part of the scheme, I see there's other schemes out from Forest Service, you know, the small woodlands grant scheme. So, like, how would a farmer, if a farmer had a hectare or whatever they wanted to plant out, how would they choose where to go for the Forest Service small woodlands grant scheme, or the scheme? What's the difference, or how would you choose?
The action on the Farming with Nature Transition Scheme is really about giving farmers flexibility to put small areas of trees in across the farm. The small woodland grant scheme offered by Forest Service has a 0.2 hectare minimum area, whereas this scheme is the minimum area is 0.05, and within the £9,500 cap, you can plant up to 1.4 hectares. Yeah. So we're working at a different scale, and perhaps giving farmers more flexibility about where on the farm would best suit trees and their farming system.
Just the last wee thing, I'm very grateful for this information because I've been asked a lot of these questions. Do you see then, would a farmer, you know, go online and you would effectively do it yourself, but is there like a designated group of like support organisations or people who could advise farmers? You know, would the department provide a list of people who are approved by the department to assist and advise farmers on what type of hedges or trees to choose and things like that there, you know, or is it just the farmer does themselves, or what, is there any,
well, in terms of the work,
an approved list of
guidance material as part of the scheme will be available, and there will be information included within that there and within the videos as well. In terms of what CAFRE can do around this as well, there will be information available through that knowledge and advisory service around best practice in terms of hedge and tree planting, Declan.
So that type of advice you recommend, say, for people at CAFRE?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the information.
Thank you. Just another point of clarification for Declan's question. The initial application is made. There's an application for whatever schemes they want to avail of. There's an assessment made by someone from the department or an official, I would imagine, and then a further application based on the assessment. Is that correct? Have I picked that up right?
As part of the spatial system that Manus mentioned, there will be areas that are not suitable, for example, for tree planting to protect breeding wader sites and so on. And so an applicant would not be able to select that area to plant trees, for example. And so that's part of the built-in assessment. Now, in relation to farmland tree planting, there will be a DAERA official will also look at those in particular, because we don't want to put the tree in the wrong place. So there's that. And then as they work through the system, the claims process then allows you to go back in and adjust what you applied for to what you've actually carried out.
And just on this then, in terms of an efficiency, if can a farmer then make single application for multiple aspects, would there be a DAERA official to be able to look at all of those things in one go, or does this require multiple fields of excellence to come out and say, for instance, look at the trees, look at the hedgerows, look at the buffer strips, look at the designated waterways or the waterways, and then make an assessment? Can it all be done sort of efficiently? Is the point?
Are you thinking from an inspection point of view?
No, for the application. So application, there's an assessment made of the site. So the assessment, and then obviously after the assessment, there's a further refinement of that application, I suspect. Yeah. So does the department have sufficient inspectors at that point of application to make it as easy and as seamless as possible and take it in the entire application?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, in relation to us here, the tree planting is the one that needs to check really before it actually takes place on the farm. The other measures shouldn't need that as such.
Because of the spatial?
Yeah, that's right. And the other part, just to be clear on it as well, the farmer makes the application to the scheme. That claim window is something that's different from EFS, because the farmer in EFS was held to what he originally applied for. Within Farming with Nature now, they can actually then go back and claim the right amount. Okay, so they're not held to what they applied for. Okay, so there's room in there to adjust as such their original application.
Obviously with limits, upper limits, and...
Yeah, that's right, and to avoid any penalties as well.
Penalties, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that, that's very clear. John?
Chair, thank you. Thanks to all of you for the information provided. This is not directly related, but I hope you can, if you can't answer it today, perhaps check this out and report back to us. And I don't expect you to have full details, because it might be some information that's required from other business areas of DAERA. But I recall that in the last mandate it appeared that some of the sequestration measures being carried out by farmers were not being captured in the greenhouse gas inventory across the UK more broadly. So can we be assured that every effort is made to capture all of the actions, so that those carrying out the actions will have those reflected in any future carbon audits or carbon budgets that come along? Yeah. There was some evidence, particularly in hedgerow, to grow in hedges, that it wasn't being included in the figures. Now, going back here a bit historically, but I think going forward we need to ensure that all of this is itemised and listed and captured by other bodies.
One thing that's important here, John, in relation to this is a very robust monitoring and evaluation framework around the scheme, and that's something that's part of our development that we have to ensure is included going forward. And again, from an EFS point of view in the past, it's one of the areas that we've looked at within EFS and we want to take forward and improve on within Farming with Nature.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
Okay, John.
Thank you, John. Aoife?
Yep, thank you. So just a quick question. So if a farmer is already getting their single farm payment, can they apply dually for this scheme, or would they have to forfeit a portion of their single farm payment?
No.
They wouldn't.
So they'll go ahead and apply for their single farm payment at that time of the year, and then the window then for the Farming with Nature package will open and they'll apply into that. But it won't have any impact on their farm sustainability payment moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just, you've talked about different phases within the scheme. Is there any chance that they could just do phase 1 and not the rest of them, or does it have to be complete?
They decide that phase 1 suits their business, that's fine. They're under no requirement to apply onto any other phases going forward.
Okay, it's just really useful to know, because whenever they do come and ask me. And just lastly, in terms of farmers getting help, are they able to go and get assistance to make those applications within the with the DAERA staff or whatever in the centre?
I mean, there'll be the videos, there'll be information that supports the application. But they'll also have the agent support if they wish to go down that route, so they can go through their agent to do that there. Okay. Yeah, similar to BPS and the farm transition payment.
Perfect, thank you.
The DAERA Direct Office, can you go into DAERA Direct Office?
Well, the DAERA Direct Office there, in terms of staff, there'll be support there if needed. Yeah.
William?
Mr. Chairman, I think my question has been covered. Is in relation to the 2 metre buffer strip along rivers. It doesn't affect your sustainability payment. Even though you have fenced off that 2 metres, you still get paid.
Still eligible, William. Yeah. that area is still eligible. The same as it was in the previous schemes.
The AFS scheme was very rigid. I know one farmer had to pay back his entire payment because when his daughter was identifying the fields to be fenced, there was 3 meadows, but the one river run along the 3, and because they didn't identify the 3 fields, they made him pay the money back, even though he identified where the fence was to be. So sometimes things can be too rigid.
Yeah. And again, through the work that we've been doing, we've tried to ensure that there is flexibility there. We've included tolerances within the scheme that wasn't there previously within the EFS. So if you were to complete a length of work and it wasn't that exact length, then you had the potential to be penalised. Within farming with nature, there is a tolerance included. So if you go slightly over it or slightly under it, you're not going to be hit with penalty.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
You get a bit of flexibility. You can imagine where you wouldn't be able to achieve maybe a 10-metre length of hedgerow fence or continuous, but if you're picking it up and continue to, I imagine that's the flexibility that's going to be addressed.
The situation I identified, the guy, his daughter identified on the map where the fence was to be, because they didn't identify, it was all the one field. Yes. There was 3 meadows in it, you understand, because they're identified differently. He had to pay the money back.
Yeah.
It seemed very unfair.
Yeah.
Because the fencing was actually done,
Thank you. Members, any other questions?
Can the buffer strip be more than 7 metres, or is that the maximum?
That's the maximum.
Maximum, so it's be within 7 metres.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, members. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. That's I really appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So members, are you agreed that the department proceeds to make the SR? And if so, we would then consider it and the SR report in due course. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, members. Okay. Okay, agenda item 8 is the departmental written briefing update on the sustainable utilisation of livestock slurry, Sols Phase 2, referred to pages 692 to 698 of the pack, with briefing paper from DAERA regarding progress of the Small Business Research Initiative on the Sols Phase 2 programme, which aims to provide the evidence to support policy and behavioural change to address issues relating to management of nutrients. Please note that the paper has been marked restricted by the team, as some elements are regarded as commercially sensitive, as the various company proposals involve the intellectual property of those said private organisations. Members, following the completion of the Sols Phase 1, August 2023, Phase 2 was launched in June 2024 and is due to complete in September 2027, with potential for an extension of 1 year. 2 contracts were signed in the third quarter of 2024 and a third contract is in discussion. The project has had positive feedback from the industry, and by the end of the project aims to remove at least 1,000 tonnes per year of phosphorus. Any comments you content to note? Thank you, members.
I think that going by the briefing note here, that this is given positive feedback so far. I would like to maybe get a briefing on it, and if possible at some stage get a visit out to see how this actually works. I've seen some videos of it and it looks very interesting and very promising, especially in connection to what some of the questions
earlier on.
So if it was possible, I don't know what the visit schedule is, but it'd be interesting to see that in operation.
We do have the Blackstone Sols project on our list. And it is quite close. So
it's just down the road. Yeah.
There's a potential of going maybe straight after a meeting someday or another time. We'll have another look at that.
Yeah. I'm minded not the AD stuff, I think, and is really something we need to maybe, but listen, through the committee we could get our teeth much greater into a lot of this stuff if you're minded. So that's on the forward work programme, but we need to tie down some dates and stuff like that. Thank you. Okay, members, agenda item 9 is a departmental written briefing, Lucy's Law, consideration of consultation document prior to publications on pages 697, 698 of the pack, with a summary of the written briefing, also written briefing starting at page 699 of the pack. A copy of the draft consultation document, Annex A, can be found starting at page 703. Memo outlines the department intends to launch a 12-week public consultation from the 2nd of June to the 25th of August on proposals to introduce a registration scheme for anyone who intends to sell or supply puppies and kittens under 6 months old, including a ban on third-party puppy sales and supplies of these animals into Northern Ireland. Content to note? Any comments you want to make?
Note.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 10, departmental written briefing update on the outcomes of the Just Transition public consultation, pages 726, 728 of the pack, Clark's memo. which summarises the written briefing, and the written briefing paper starting on page 79. Summary of the responses received to consultation Annex A and the consultation of the establishment of a Just Transition Commission Annex B can be found starting on page 736. There's a strong support from respondents for DAERA's proposals on the type of public body the Commission should be, with the majority of respondents agreeing that the Commission should be an advisory, non-departmental public body, an NDPB, comprising members who represent a wide range of sectors. DAERA will provide further evidence of the committee in due course on the proposed policy content of the draft regulations. I've noted some of I've had a look at that, I just find it very interesting. Any comments to make on that, or are you content to note and deal with it as it comes? Yep, thank you, members. Agenda item 11 is correspondence. Correspondence from DAERA to the Committee of Infrastructure, starting at page 854 of the pack regarding wastewater capacity in Northern Ireland compliance and environmental matters. We last considered wastewater capacity at our meeting on the 27th of February, where we provided a copy of a written briefing from NIEA to the Committee for Infrastructure. At its meeting on the 5th of March, the Committee for Infrastructure then received oral evidence from NIEA on compliance and environmental matters regarding the wastewater network. The Committee then requested further information on the constraints and increase in the capacity. The correspondence from DAERA provides responses to those Infrastructure Committee queries. Any comments? Are you content to know? Thank you, members. Item 11.2, referred to the memo from the Clerk Committee of Finance dated 22nd of May, page 862 of your pack. The memo states that the Department of Finance has formally commissioned returns from all departments in respect of June monitoring round by Thursday, 5th of June. We are due to be briefed by officials on the June monitoring round at our meeting on said 5th of June. Any comments? Content to know? Thank you, members. Referred to a member from the Clerk for the Committee of Finance dated 22nd of May, page 868 of the pack regarding budget sustainability, 5-year departmental plans guidance. Guidance can be found on page 870. Memo states the Committee for Finance has provided us with detailed guidance given departments to facilitate the production of their 5-year business plans. Do you have any comments you content to note? Thank you. Next item, I refer to page the 40th, a report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Report does not refer any SRs to the relevance of the Committee. Content to note? Thank you. 11.5, referred to the member from the Clerk Committee of Finance dated 23rd of May at page 917 of the pack regarding deaths, stillbirth and baby loss bill. A copy of the bill as introduced, the explanatory and financial memorandum for the bill and a research briefing paper on the bill was prepared by Raise, and that starts at page 918 of the pack. The bill completed its second stage on Monday the 7th of April and has been referred to the Committee for Finance for scrutiny and is seeking the views of all Assembly statutory committees to allow members the opportunity to comment on issues on the bill. Any response, including a nil response, are requested by noon on Friday the 20th of June. The bill represents a considered update to Northern Ireland's civil registration framework, and perhaps the issue for this committee would be the readiness and consistency of the new digital registration system across rural local councils. I just suggest maybe that the committee wants to write to SOLAS to see if any issues have been envisaged for rural councils in regard to this bill. Are you content with that, members? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, members. Okay. Next item, refer to page 7 to 10 of the table of papers to written briefing from Clean Water Sports Alliance NI, which the Infrastructure Committee are also considering at its meeting this week. The Clean Water Sports Alliance represents over 22,000 club members and 300,000 participants and believes that water sports are vital for community health and economic benefits, but face challenges due to poor water quality. It is advocating for improved water quality management and infrastructure, including adequate funding for responsible bodies, real-time water quality monitoring and a change of classification from bathing waters to recreation waters to recognise the wide range of activities that depend on clean water. Are you content that the Clerk liaises with the Infrastructure Clerk to consider a potential joint informal meeting and to invite the Alliance to brief? Yep. And also there was a point that I think it was Robbie McDowell, I think is that his name, had said about advances in that real-time monitoring. Maybe if we can just furnish him with, if we have a piece of that, it may be picked out of the report that we got today. There wasn't a lot of detail in it, but it was a step forward across the water there.
So, Chair, so just you wish me to write to the Clean Water Alliance once I've discussed this?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. We're content with that, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Well, Chair, on that one, we're going to liaise with the Infrastructure Committee.
Who, sorry? The Infrastructure? Yes.
And whether or not we hear from these people, yeah.
Well, Chair, their Infrastructure Committee are considering that same piece of correspondence
joint
today.
Informal, so that's what that's about, yeah.
I'll speak to that.
Thank you. Members are referred to pages 11 and 14 papers for the Investment Strategy Northern Ireland ISNI Delivery Tracking System. Are you content to note? Any comments? Content to note? Thank you. Agenda item 12, forward work plan. Draft forward work plan can be found in the pack at page 974. Do you agree that the forward work plan is published? Thank you, members. Any other business? Yes?
Very briefly, thank you, Chair. Obviously, we received a copy of the open letter that industry have sent with regards to the reaction to the NAP proposals. I'm not sure whether we're going to consider that at this stage or whether we're going to consider that then in our informal discussions, but obviously I would like to personally welcome that.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah, I think it's very useful, and yeah, we're going to pick that up in our informal, if members are minded. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, the meeting is now adjourned, but I request that you stay in the room for a short forward work plan discussion. Thank you.
Committee Room 21. Sound. Committee Room 21. Sound. Committee Room 21. Sound. Committee Room 21. Sound.